Good morning. This is the regular meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners. It's July 16th, 2019. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioners Decker, Bonner, and Goldsmith are present, and we have a quorum.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, with respect to consent items, do we have public comment cards?
We have one comment card on each item by Mr. Herman.
Okay, very good. Commissioners, do any of you have questions on what is listed as the consent agenda items A through I? Very well. We'll begin with public comment on item 1A. Mr. Herman?
And we do have two cards on 1B.
Thank you.
I brought some paperwork for the record on item 1A, that of the chair, Mr. Sobroff, who's not here, Inspector General Mark P. Smith, Chief Michael Moore, and hey, the new pro chair, Ms. Ellen Decker, for the record. Thank you. So as we understand what Citizens United, Not Timid means now, we understand that $295 was allocated to City Employees Club of Los Angeles regarding the Baker to Vegas run. You know, I used to run 10Ks before in my prime. Now I could barely walk about a mile before I catch out of breath, smelling all the smog in Los Angeles and sucking in all that garbage that you live on our sidewalk and streets. Not the homeless people. They're the dignified people. It's the other fools that don't clean up our public sidewalk and streets on a daily basis regarding our running. And because, as you see, I still have a athletic look to myself, it's because I try to look my best on behalf of all your constituents who at one time want to run.
Please direct your remarks to the item, which is the acceptance of a donation.
It's Ms. Decker, correct?
Yes, sir.
Let the record reflect that. Going back to Baker to Vegas running, you know, it's all a part of life that we have to learn to accept things. How do we accept things? Well, we turn in public comment cards, or we have a tag that we put on our shirts when we run, so people can recognize what part of police division we participate in, detective division, rank and file division, you know, your TRO threat management. But once again, due to time and consideration of others, for the record, here are my documentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Herman, you're up now on item 1B.
Oh, 1B?
Yes, sir.
I didn't get a chance to sit. Thank you. Let me read into the report. Dated July 15, 2019, totaling about looks like about $8,000 to the Los Angeles Police Foundation regarding chief, staff, professional backdrop to host public speaking events. You know, I find that offensive. You know, you don't need to advertise anymore. We know who you are. Don't we know who they are? I do. We become the state capital of gunning down people in the world, on top of we're the hit and run capital of the world as well. But again, this issue of $8,000 to the Los Angeles Police Foundation, why haven't we had a posting of all the donations on behalf of the Los Angeles Police Foundation so we can match and consider whether or not they're appropriate actions or offensive actions? Because we don't know how this money is delegated in terms of the foundation. Sometimes it can be used as hush money, it can be used as bribes, and it could be unconventional miscellaneous money for having sex with children. But that's not the topic here. The events to benefit BBC 19/0187, we hear that recommendations from the board action approve the department's report and accept this donation. I'm in opposition to that until we get a listing posted on the outdoor of this facility where the public can weigh in on how many donations and what dollar amount of donations and where the micromanagement of this money is actually being allocated and being spent well on, because it's apparent that the training is doing very poor, and that's why you have the FBI investigating the Sheriff's Department. Thank you.
Officer, please remove that swastika of Mr. Herman put on the podium. Thank you. Who's the second speaker?
Michael Novick.
Mr. Novak.
Yeah, we've talked before about the conflict of interest with the LA Police Foundation and your president, who's not here today, thankfully. But $8,000 seems excessive for a professional backdrop for a public speaking event. I think this is more propaganda. It's an attempt to influence the thinking of the public by the police department. It's inappropriate for the police department to try to present itself for these kinds of events where they seek to shape the thinking of the population of the city. As I said before, it's part of their effort at what they consider PSYOPs, so-called community policing, to control the thinking of the population or the enemy. It's militarized propaganda efforts by the police. So I'm opposed to this grant. You should reject it. You should tell the Police Foundation to spend this money on actual needs of the people of the city of Los Angeles: housing, jobs, food, health care. And I would apply that to all the other items here that you're getting, the $3,300 from the Police Foundation for item D, and a lot of money for this race, all of which is designed to somehow improve the image of the police. If you want to improve the image of the police, there's a simple measure you can take: stop killing people. And so I think that you don't need to purchase a professional backdrop. You need to purchase some professional policing that understands that people have human rights.
Thank you, sir. With respect to items 1A and 1B, is there a motion to approve the department's report and accept those donations? Second? All in favor? Aye. That's 3-0 for passage of 1A and 1B. With respect to 1C, Madam Secretary, how many cards are there?
We have one card. We have Mr. Herman.
Mr. Herman? Please restart the clock.
Well, I brought the new modified embroidered design for the new jackets. This design will not only improve and enhance the way to improve the police, but it will show the world the type of treatment, propaganda that we have for our new jackets. See, this is the criteria of new attire. You know why, right? Because for $2,295 of donations, you know, you can take the first item of $295 added to this $2,000. Now we have $2,295 allocated to approve the departments to report and accept this donation. But I disapprove that, because until the Police Foundation from the Southwest area can accept my proposal of the embroidered new jacket look, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? It kind of draws attention to a lot of history of how to improve the police. You see, look, you can take it anywhere, stick it on your clothing. Look at that, bam! It's all new. See that, folks? So remember, when you go to the courthouse, Moss Courthouse, take the emblem with you, because Jennifer H. Cox, mic is off, hello, mic is off. Thank you, Ms. Decker. As you see, Miss Jennifer H. Cops has approved this design on my behalf because of the TRO, through the improvement of the police propaganda, for Police Foundation to use and purchase this new design that I've created. I'll donate my time anytime you guys want any new embroidered emblems. I'm welcome to any pinpointing when you want to pinpoint your finger. But again, as you heard from Little Boozy and NWA, fuck the police.
Mr. Herman, you're up on 1D, please.
Oh, here we go. D, regarding $3,355.95. By the way, that's a nice suit you're wearing, Mr. T. Fank. However, the Police Foundation has a new training and lodging regarding de-escalation of the use of a canine handler dog. Woo! Woo! Well, why would we have a de-escalation on the use of a canine dog? Well, I have experience with the dog. You know, I was trained by the Department of Justice, and they gave me the right and the permission to carry this little affidavit that says that my service dog can really calm people down and actually put a smile on your face. And that's called de-escalation and the use of a well-trained canine handler to use the same process that I am here to present. You see, there's always a good way to skin a cat. You get a new dog. Woo, woo. And when the dog comes in, detection dogs especially, what do? The bomb's right here. The bomb's over here. And then you can get a different type of dog that's really aggressive. I'm going to bite you. And then you have the other type of dog that actually attacks and rips a man to shreds over the fact that all he was trying to steal was a hamburger to eat. That's not de-escalation. So from this department's report based on July 9, 2019, regarding the Police Foundation and the detection of dog trainers course in Las Vegas, I'm in opposition. You could train your dogs in office, get online, DOJ, and they'll show you the specifics rather than wasting taxpayers' money on narcotics since you passed Measure 64.
You're up on 1E, Mr. Herman.
I'm on a roll. Woo, woo, woo. So, regarding E, BPC 19-0190, approve the department's report of a donation. Well, regarding the, oh God, is this, architects? I thought it said Archdiocese Association. Aren't there those people that pedify young children or young boys? Well, anyways, it says here that they used to pay, or they're actually using money to pay for the $500 added to the $2,295. Well, you guys are just cashing in here, man. This sounds like a hell of a benefit to raise fees. Why don't you donate that money to women with breast cancer, or better, why don't you donate that money to children or foster children who've been raped by grown men who take them to barbecue
Madam
parties?
Chair, he's off topic.
Mr. Herman,
So
get
this
on topic.
$500 from the Engineers Association, let me correctly put it, Engineers and Architects Association, is to pay for the Baker Rally race fees. So I'm in support of the engineers, architects. I did a background check online. They have no sites open to children porn.
He's off
and
topic,
their money
Madam
is
President.
Mr.
well
Herman,
worth
get on topic, please, sir.
the race and fees for the. I am on topic. I'm here in support of this item. This is the only item that I so far supported, and you got some jackass weighing in telling you I'm off topic when I'm not. Give me the opportunity to weigh in and rethink what I have to say. When you engage and interrupt me, then I have to call the asshole a jackass. So I'm done.
Madam Chair, he's off topic.
Thank you. With respect to items 1C, D, and E, Madam Secretary, were there any other public comment cards?
There were none.
Very well. May I have members of the commission, motion to approve and accept the department's reports and accept the donation? Is there a motion? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0. Those items pass. The next four items relate to the authority to destroy obsolete duplicate records for four different divisions within the department. And my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, that with respect to all of these items, these are for duplicate records that the department still maintains a copy of those records, correct?
That's correct, and this is pursuant to the City Council's approved retention schedule and responsive to that.
Very well, Chief. Thank you. Madam Secretary, with respect to item 1F, are there any public comment cards?
We have Mr. Herman,
And 1G?
Mr. Herman, and 1H, Mr. Herman. There are no cards for 1I.
no cards for 1I. In that case, members of the board, can there be a motion to approve the department's report and transmit to the city clerk, the records management officer, the information indicated in 1I?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
That passes 3-0. And am I correct, Madam Secretary? Mr. Herman is the only speaker on 1F, G, and H.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Herman, 1F, please.
Wilshire area. Duplicate records. Now, we must ask the city attorney, who has a history of sitting in on these destruction of records, whether or not this is politically motivated by the city charter. You know, we should never destroy any records for at least 25 years to ensure the consistency of duplicates are not contaminated by those who ignorantly misuse the threat management unit to enforce the destruction of duplicate records. Because this request was only a recommendation by the board's action. Where's the public's action on this, Mr. Carlos de la Guerra? Why can't the public say what's important to destroy? I think we should destroy the city charter, for the record, and amend to a new realistic request of how records should be destroyed. This way, the city clerk will defy what we, the legislative body, the Ralph M. Brown Act, recommend as the action. But in this, for instance, like BBC, is that an acronym? What does BPC stand for? Is that stands for Big Public Cunt under number 190191? Because that's how I look at this acronym. It's just an acronym. I mean, don't take it offensive. I mean, it's all part of the game, right? We put abbreviations that the public don't understand, and they want to weigh in. By the way, for the record, you forgot to turn in my forms for you guys, Ms. Decker.
Mr. Herman, please continue on item 1G.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. You're such a lovely presenter, Madam Chair. Can you do it more often instead of letting that terrorist...
You're off topic,
Oh,
Mr.
I'm
Herman.
sorry. I was just trying to gratify you. Sorry. I'll talk to Aaron Lewis about that. Anyways, again, regarding these records, you know, I spoke to an attorney by the name of Aaron Lewis, Aaronlewis, and he's a well-known attorney under Covington LLP, and he only charges about $1,000 for his services regarding
Madam Chair,
obsolete
he's off
records.
topic.
You know,
Mr.
this is,
Herman, bring it back to the topic.
yes, ma'am. I'm trying to explain how the Newton area needs to hire this authority of Aaron Lewis, a very well-known attorney. Matter of fact, I believe you know him, Ms. Decker, for the record. Wasn't he in your Obama team back in the days?
Madam Chair, he's off topic again.
Mr. Herman, please direct your comments
Okay.
to the destruction of duplicate records.
Right. So, in regards to the Newton area duplicate records, I'm here in favor because some jackass keeps saying I'm off topic and doesn't give me a chance to engage and finish my point. I'm here in support and favor. Thank you, ma'am.
Sir, you have 1H as well. If you're done,
Oh, no,
that's
I
fine.
like H. I like H as much as we like H. So, regarding request for authority, once again, how many fucking same item? Why don't you just bunch the items like you do with all the other items? This way I could have just had 1 minute and wrap this up. Now I jerked off for 6 minutes already.
Madam Chair, he's off
regarding
topic.
authority.
Mr. Herman,
Of
if
the
you have
South-
something to say about the
Yeah,
destruction of evidence
I'm getting there,
of
ma'am. It's
records,
called the
please do
South
so.
Traffic Division, right? STD, South Traffic Division, STD. So I know where I'm at. You know, I have a little trouble reconnecting, but I'm a very simple person when it comes to recommendations of your actions. But you have to remember that we are the legislative body here. We weigh in on what's good for
Madam
the
Chair, he's
public
off topic again.
and
Mr.
what's
Herman.
not. So, again, I am not in support of the South Traffic Division to destroy obsolete records. I would like you to shelve them so that I and anyone here in this meeting today can go through those records with transparency to see if possibly you did not put some other hidden record in there to be destroyed by accident. And now those poor detectives have to work another 2 years through those files to figure out who in the fuck fucked up on destroying these records. Thank you.
With respect to items 1F, G, and H, is there a motion to approve the department's report and transmit it to the city clerk?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 3-0. Those items pass. And I'll just say briefly for the record that the members of this commission do not condone any form of hate speech or offensive speech that happens during these meetings. We apologize to members of the public who are offended by the language. We do note that the California courts repeatedly state that such conduct and such even offensive speech is protected speech under the First Amendment. We'll now move on to the regular agenda items, and I'd ask members of the department to come forward regarding the Medal of Valor proposed to be presented to Sergeant Rojas, Officer Taylor, Officer Cervantes, and Officer Moorhead.
Good morning, Board.
Morning.
It's my distinct honor and pleasure to be able to brief
Captain,
you
can
on
you
this.
identify yourself for the record, please?
My name is Captain Lou Palialonga. I'm the Area Commanding Officer of Southeast Area where this incident occurred. On April 24th of 2018, Sergeant Vincent Rojas, Officer Harlan Taylor, Andrew Cervantes, and Christopher Moorhead responded to a radio call of a fireman needs help at 15400 South Orchard Avenue. Taylor and Cervantes were the first officers to arrive, and they were advised by the LAFD fire department personnel that there was an active shooter inside of the location, and that there were 2 victims down in front of the residence who had been shot by the suspect. The firefighters also told them that that they had responded to the location earlier for a structure fire, and as they were finishing up their work, the suspect exited the residence, shot 2 people, and fired upon them as well. Firefighters were outside of the residence at the time of the shooting, and they fled on foot and took cover behind their rescue vehicles. The firefighters inside the residence ran out the rear door of the residence and down the street to find cover also from the gunfire. Officer Taylor immediately took charge of the scene as a senior officer, quickly broadcast a request for additional units to respond, and advised that they had an active shooter at the location with victims down in front. As Southeast personnel responded to this help call, they were directed by Taylor to take positions of cover for their safety around the location. One victim, a female, was observed lying on the sidewalk in front of the location, but they could not find a second victim. When Sergeant Rojas arrived at the scene, he immediately began to take command and control and assisted the groups to provide supervisory oversight of their activities. Rojas and Taylor developed a plan to rescue the female victim in front of the residence. The front door of the residence was open, and the suspect was observed moving about in the front door. Officers on the perimeter were advised of the rescue, so there's good communication there, and to avoid any kind of contagious fire should the suspect appear again. Sergeant Rojas, Taylor, Moorhead, and Cervantes left their positions of cover and recovered the victim from the sidewalk. Cervantes was the lead with a shotgun, and officers Moorhead and Taylor each grabbed the arms and legs of the victim and pulled her behind nearby parked vehicles to safety, where her condition could be assessed. Unfortunately, once they arrived at a position of cover, it was determined that the victim had sustained multiple gunshot wounds to her head, and she was deceased. The officers responded back to their positions around the residence. It was determined that the second possible victim actually was the suspect who had began the fire and shot his mother in front of the locations. He ended up turning the gun on himself and shot himself in the chest. Metropolitan Division SWAT responded. However, as they were setting up on the location, the suspect surrendered without further incident. The suspect was then arrested for murder, transported to Harbor UCLA Medical Center, and where he was treated. I'm proud to say that the call was resolved without any further use of force or any further injury to any firefighters, police personnel, or any other members of the public around. The courageous actions of Sergeant Rojas, Officer Harlan Taylor, Andrew Cervantes, and Christopher Moorhead reflect the highest standards of the Los Angeles Police Department. Their bravery, decisiveness, selfless action are worthy of the department's highest award for valor. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Captain. Just briefly, first of all, thank you very much for that presentation. Could you just describe the process that has gone through for nominating and ultimately presenting a proposed Medal of Valor recipient to us?
Yes, ma'am. It starts with the command, where we submitted this up to the Bureau as a commendation, a Bureau commendation. Once it gets looked at upon by higher members of the department, it will get perhaps recognized for medals sometimes, or sometimes not. This case, there was such such valor and sacrifice and selflessness involved. It did get nominated. Then it goes before a department awards commendations and awards panel. Members of the department will look at this, and they can kind of look at the whole perspective of the department and judge which awards are more appropriate as they see them on a department-wide basis. And that happened in this case, and it was nominated for Medal of Valor. I'm very proud of the officers for that.
Thank you. Other questions from members of the committee? Oh, sorry, Chief.
I'm sorry, Madam President, or Vice President, if I might, then from that nomination from the Awards and Commendation Committee, which is shared by Chief Peters and Chief Baeza, then it's brought before me, and it's my ultimate determination as to the which awards to provide and recommend them to this board. It is the Medal of Valor, the highest department's award for bravery and valor, and one that we require a distinction as to the actions and bravery of the officers.
Thank you. Other questions?
Just a couple. One, are they here with us today?
I don't believe that they are here today. No,
Okay.
no, sir.
The other question was, this was obviously, I think, an exceptional demonstration and display of valor. The question is that when you have situations that don't go or don't have an outcome such as this one, we often have a series of debriefings where there's an opportunity to look at things that could have been done better. In these situations where there was an exceptional display of valor and courage and instincts and training, are there opportunities for the officers to share that experience with others so that others can just learn and benefit from the incident as well?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, at the time I was the patrol commanding officer of the division when this occurred, and this exact situation was a subject of roll call training and briefings where the officers were able to give their insight and things that they could have done better, things that they learned, whether those things were having proper tools or proper tactics or just the command and control and communication. All of those things were done in this exact incident so we can all get better and learn from it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Commissioner Goldsmith, any questions? Are there public comment cards on item 2A?
We have one card. We have Mr. Herman.
Mr. Herman.
Dispatch. Thank you, ma'am. Radio call goes out on April 24, 2018. 4 heroic officers of the rank and file, the best of the best, put aside their valor and stepped into the line of business to serve and protect. Isn't that what we want in our community? They didn't have to draw their guns. Because Shane over there, Ms. Goldberg, knows what it's like when a person's having a mental health crisis and decides to gun down his girlfriend or wife, says, I'm tired of the bitch. Put a bullet to her head. Kind of like that.
Mr. Herman, you're not on topic. If you want to address your remarks to the Medal of Valor,
I'm giving
we'll
an
listen to you.
example. Can I give examples?
Get back on topic, sir.
Thank you. So this one female who was deceased at the scene couldn't be revived. Too many bullets in her body, kind of like the bullets I've seen at the County USC when I was wrapping up bodies for the second floor morgue. However, the 2 shots heard by the officers in their action responded immediately, without fear, except fear of the dark. But it never caught up to them. That's why they're here working and not getting their presentation. So I'm here on behalf of the public and on behalf of Michael Moore's miscellaneous expense that I am demanding, as of today, you allocate $1,000 checks to these fine officers who serve the public at the Harbor Medical Hospital for bringing a deceased body to the hospital and taking down the so-called insane man who they didn't have to bother with because he put a bullet to his head, kind of like that Bang the Nation guy versus the United States, where he says, I'll put a bullet in Obama's head. Fuck the nigger.
We have no other comment cards.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the department's report? Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
It passes. Thank you very much, Captain, and indeed, it demonstrated exceptional valor on the part of these officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. I'll pass that to them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 1B.
2B.
Excuse me, 2B. Thank you. The department's report relative to an update on the Office of Inspector General review of the jail and holding tank structures and procedures. Before we begin with the department's presentation, and in part because Commissioner Bonner and myself were not a member of the commission when the report was initially presented, and I want to be clear about procedurally what we're doing today. If I could ask first Mr. Tiefank to just give us a brief overview of where the commission left this with respect to the recommendations and a vote today, what that vote means. Mr. Tiefank?
Yes, ma'am. The report was originally heard by the commission on June 19th of 2018. At that time, it was continued to July 17th of 2018. And the commission president appointed a subcommittee of past commissioners, Matt Johnson and Cynthia McLean Hill, to work with the IG and the department on responding to the recommendations. So since that period of time, I know while the two commissioners were on the commission, they had met several times with the department and the inspector general. And over that period of time, there has been work on the recommendations that are before you today. So the report before you today is the department's response to that initial Inspector General's report that was heard originally on June 19th of 2018. The action that you would take today, should you take action on the recommendations or any manner of those, and I think at the conclusion, I could better address that at that point, would be the conclusion of this item unless you continue certain portions of it to a future date.
Very good. Thank you. Members of the commission, are there questions procedurally before we get to the substance on where we're at and where we would be going if we were to, as the recommendation says, receive and file the department's report? Just on procedure alone.
Just on procedure, I think the question is if we get through the presentation and the questions and determine that there's further areas for that warrant further consideration, I would presume we could continue the
We'd
process
continue
that
those
was,
items.
described.
We'd vote on the rest and continue those items. Correct? Any other questions, Mr. Bonner?
Not on process.
Oh, okay. Then let's move on to the substance. May I ask first the IG just to give us a brief overview of what the report was, just so everybody has the context as we listen to the response of the department.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Chief. Good morning, everyone. As Mr. Tiefank mentioned, back in June of 2018, and at the direction of this Police Commission, the Office of Inspector General did a review where we looked at 5 years of in-custody deaths and attempted suicides within the LAPD's jail facilities and police station holding tanks. We presented our findings back in June to this commission. And to say it briefly, and I'll be happy to go into further detail if required, some of the things that we focused on were anchor points that were used in suicides in the jail and the suggested elimination of those potential anchor points to avoid future suicides or minimize the risk of it. We looked at the jail intake and housing classification processes and found some areas that we thought could be improved in those processes. And we also made suggestions for a new adjudication protocol for in-custody deaths that occur in jails and holding tanks. In total, we made 16 individual recommendations spread across those primary categories for the Commission's consideration. That's maybe I'll stop there as a brief background.
That's terrific. Thank you. And thank you for your patience. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves and then make your presentation, sir.
Certainly. Good morning, Commissioners, Chief, Mr. T-Fank, and Mr. Smith. My name is Captain Gary Newton, and I'm the Assistant Commanding Officer of Custody Services Division. With me today is Lieutenant Wang of Critical Incident Review Division, who is able to speak on the investigation and adjudication process of in-custody deaths. Thank you. The report before you today is the third status report of the implementation efforts related to jail policy and structural modifications as recommended by the Office of the Inspector General. Since 2016, Custody Services Division and the Office of the Inspector General have been working together, examining every facet of jail operations with the understanding and desire that the outcome would be an improvement in the way we care for those in our custody. Speaking specifically to the items, item number 1, the department has reduced suicide hazards such as O-rings in holding tanks. We've removed all of those O-rings. None exist currently. There were some gaps between bunks that were a potential suicide hazard. Those have we've welded metal plates over those gaps. And we've installed cord-free phones in all of our segregation cells where most suicides and attempt suicides occur. Item number 2, video cameras have been installed in all operational department jail cells. Holding tank cameras at the geographic divisions are the responsibility of Facilities Management Division, and they have made several budget requests in the past and have a current budget request to install cameras in the division holding cells. Item number 3, safety checks in area police station holding tanks have been addressed in June of 2018 with an Office of Operations notice requiring watch commanders to document direct observation checks. The checks are State of California Title 15 compliant, which sets rules and regulations for jail operations. Item number 4, in July of 2018, a new inmate classification assessment form was activated, which addresses observed inmate behavior prior to housing, and we did meet with the Office of the Inspector General several times on the content of that classification assessment. Privacy considerations are impacted by the, item number 5, privacy considerations are impacted by the existing physical design of the jails, which did not take this into consideration when the jails were originally built. However, personnel do utilize the existing space and exercise discretion as best possible when asking health-related questions. They either step to one side that is unoccupied of the jail, or they can ask those questions in their patrol vehicle, which provides some privacy. Item number 6, Medical Services Division and Custody Service Division have always worked closely together. We meet at least monthly, usually more, to review all related medical issues and concerns regarding the care of inmates in our custody. MSD has recently implemented an electronic medical record system, which replaces their paper system that they've used forever, for better record keeping, which will only improve our ability to provide the needed medical care in our jail facilities. Lastly, in October of 2018, CSD implemented a dispensary support officer program where detention officers regularly work with medical staff throughout their shift to ensure arrestee medical issue awareness during the intake and booking process. Item number 7, the inmate classification assessment implemented in July 2018 addresses this concern. For items 8, 9, and 10, the department has raised the level of all detention officer training in recognizing signs and symptoms of mental illness. CSD has increased the training in our academy from 10 hours to 26 hours of mental health training, and we provide 8 hours of mandatory annual mental health recurrence training. for all CSD personnel. Item number 11, the jail operations manual has gone through its final revisions and was completed by the end of the first quarter of 2019. The updated January 2019 jail operations manual is now posted on the local area network. Item number 12, regarding the Title 15 compliance for a 30-day review of all in-custody deaths with the medical administrator, we implemented this recommendation in 2017. Item number 13, in addition, the department has implemented a formalized attempt suicide review procedure to investigate and analyze how these incidents can better be prevented. Our first documented attempt suicide with the new protocol was November 3rd, 2018, and we have documented a total of 13 suicide attempts since that date. On items 14 and 15 regarding adjudication of in-custody deaths, I will defer to Lieutenant Huang.
Good morning, Commissioners, Chief, Mr. T. Fank, and Director Smith. Lieutenant James Wang from Critical Incident Review Division, and I was going to go over the process of what we looked at for the implementation of the new jail and holding tank in-custody death adjudication procedure. When we looked at the issue here, when we look at in-custody death, quite often in the station, in the jail, it does not occur with a force application and occurs without massive or large intervention by the department in terms of officer personnel using force. The current process right now, we conduct an investigative review, and what's been proposed is that we would look at Force Investigation Division would come out to the location, conduct their investigation. They would look at the pertinent details of initial detention, requests for medical treatment at the scene, jail or holding tank intake procedures, medical screening and treatment while in department facility, ongoing Title 15 checks, and post-in-custody death protocols. Once that FID investigation has been completed, the chain of command, including the division, bureau, and office, would conduct the recommendations to the Director of Office of Support Services. The Director of Office of Support Services would conduct an investigation and review of all of pertinent information, and then would give a recommendation to the Chief of Police. The Chief of Police would then also conduct an investigation review and would draft a chief's report. What would be different here is the findings sections would include now pre-booking, custody, and post-in-custody death procedures, and whether a determination whether they were consistent or inconsistent with established criteria. Currently, right now, we use the categorical use of force categories, which is tactics, drawn exhibiting, and force application, which are not relevant in some of our in-custody deaths. This would allow a more relevant and more pertinent finding in those three categories. As with the current protocol, the Office of Inspector General would also still continue to conduct their independent review of this process and ensure that we have a good process by the FID investigation and also our review and our report. The Chief's intent is that to provide with the Board of Police Commissioners sufficient information to whether you would adopt or not adopt the Chief's report. For Section 15, we're looking at the Office of Inspector General recommended that they would prohibition of reclassification of categorical use of force investigations to death investigations for all jail and holding tank in custody deaths. The department's position on this one is that right now the current procedure for us to reclassify in custody deaths to death investigations per current protocol is appropriate and correct. Currently, right now, classifications conducted for the following. If the LA County Coroner's Office makes a preliminary determination that a death was caused by natural, accidental, or undetermined means, the incident did not involve a use of force or evidence of foul play, there is no misconduct, no violation of department policies and procedures which directly led to the death, the toxicology report supports a coroner's determination, and the investigation reveals no problematic evidence or seriously conflicting witness statements regarding the incident. It is the department's position that that is a correct procedure in place. We believe, though, if you look at number 14 with our deeper analysis in custody deaths, coupled with the current process, and we would end with a good result. As with also Section 14, the Office of Inspector General would still conduct an independent review of all FID investigation and also any reports that are generated.
And I'm available for any questions you may have.
Thank you both very much. A couple of, I think, big picture questions before going into more details. First, I understand you concurred in a number of the recommendations and have taken very significant steps towards achieving all of those goals. So I'd like to turn your attention to those recommendations where it wasn't clear you were concurring, although it looked like many of the actions taken were in concurrence with the objectives. And specifically numbers 3, 5, 6, and 8, as I understand with respect to those items, you've taken a number of steps, but certain fiscal restraints have prohibited you from further developing those areas to be consistent with the IG's recommendations. Is that an accurate assessment?
Correct. Regarding cameras?
Cameras and privacy. I mean, there's, I can
right.
go back.
And I can speak to the cameras and maybe about Police Administrator Brennan.
Well, it's more a it's fiscal considerations that are prohibiting moving forward. Is that correct?
Well, Commissioners, if I could on this, I believe you're on referencing number 2. There's a fiscal constraint there relative to holding tanks. However, on some of these other matters relative to the frequency of inspections as well as the placement of health and classification questions in a private space, and then lastly, this issue of establishing a permanent housing and classification officer. The department also is looking at these from a more practical standpoint of the of what is a balance in providing. Now I'll do in reverse order. What's the balance of what will be gained versus the costs involved? For instance, on the classification and housing officer, that location or that recommendation we believe is better implemented when all individuals that are in a custody setting from a employment standpoint, regardless of the lowest ranking individual to its highest on duty, share in the responsibility of evaluating and monitoring the status of arrestees. We process year to date 45,000 arrestees, and each of those require an assessment at a number of stages. And in this particular recommendation, we believe that the significant costs associated with staffing 27 additional personnel, that those personnel would be better invested in opening existing shuttered facilities such as Harbor Jail and other jail facilities rather than this concentration or this squeeze point of this classification officer. I think that the classification officer could in and of itself become a false sense of security because the person who's charged with that, if that becomes singular, everyone looks to that person to be the one responsible. And we feel that that responsibility should be shared. As to the location of how and the privacy of how we do health and classification questions, while the desirability in the ultimate scheme would allow such a privacy booth, the reality is both in and out of custody settings, these types of questions are regularly asked and evaluated. So we try to strike a balance of isolating an individual for purposes of doing this screening versus the processing of literally hundreds of individuals through a systematic way. And I think that the current process affords some limited confidentiality, but is also realistic in the sense of how and the limitations of our designs. Lastly, the aspect of the frequency of jail checks. We believe that we are clocking in the sense of twice an hour for a general inspection is above the state requirements. And for those individuals that are exhibiting suicidal or need a high control setting, such as a padded cell, those inspections are much more frequent and ongoing to ensure the safety of the individual.
Thank you, Chief. Leaving aside items 14 and 15, is it the department's intent to ask City Council for any additional funding to more robustly achieve the recommendations of the IG, or is it the department's position that what you've stated and what's presented in this report satisfies those recommendations?
It is our intention at this stage, absent direction to the contrary from this board, that we would continue to pursue video cameras within holding cells and update the existing camera systems within our jails. Well, we have camera systems within our jails that are operational today. Many of them are analog or dated as to their capabilities, and this has been a recurring budgetary request, and we'll continue to pursue it. I believe that in the coming this next coming budget cycle, I'm hopeful that we'll see greater support for this, and much like our technology upgrade and updating that the council and the mayor found the ability to support, we will advocate for this as well.
Okay. Thank you. I think my next questions are to the IG. First, with respect to the conversation we just had regarding the items other than 14 and 15, is it the Office of Inspector General's view that the response of the department is sufficient, with the caveat that they're asking for more budgetary funding for the video cameras? What is the IG's response to the department's report?
Well, at the end of the day, we would stand by our recommendations, and in particular, there are two that kind of stood out to me and the ones that you enumerated. One was, again, with the privacy issues as far as the intake points. To us, we understood that there are some budgetary concerns with that as far as kind of being able to construct a true private area to do some of these intake questions. However, we think that would be a best practice, so we stand by that recommendation. Again, understanding that there are some budgetary issues with it. And then secondly, with regard to the classification housing officer position, we stand by the recommendation as well. We think that it's best served by having one person who has expertise in that area be that control point. We do understand that that involves a heavy contingent of personnel to really support that new position in all of the department's facilities, and that carries with the budget constraints as well, but we still think that's a best practice.
Very well. And so it's, to summarize that, it would be the position of the IG's office that, with respect, leaving aside 14 and 15 for the moment, that the department should, in addition to be asking for more funding for the video cameras, they should also be asking for additional funding to address the privacy concerns and the housing officer position.
Correct.
Understood. Turning then to 14 and 15. If I could ask the Inspector General with respect to 14 and 15, I view them as interrelated items, and I'm sure that's why they were presented jointly by the department. Can you respond to the department's summary here of their position?
Yeah, I think you're correct. They're indeed interrelated, and through quite a good deal of back and forth as far as meetings and draft language, we think the department has appropriately addressed the concerns that were raised by the IG in 14 and 15. To say it with a little more detail, our primary concern with some of the reclassifications that were happening was that we didn't think there was sufficient information being presented through that process, and we also wanted to ensure that the police commission had the ability to look at those cases and make a judgment on them. Although the department chose a slightly different route than what our initial recommendation was, their route addressed those concerns, and so we feel comfortable with those responses.
And, okay, so that was my ultimate question, whether the Office of Inspector General was satisfied with the response, and you are.
Yes.
And is it your intent for the Inspector General's office to continually review that process and procedures to ensure that actually it is obtaining the result that you sought?
Yes, and part of what the response, I think, appropriately says that each individual case will get reviewed by the Inspector General, so we'll give the opportunity to do that on a case-by-case basis as well.
Okay, very good. Commissioners, let me ask if you have questions. Commissioner Goldsmith? No? Commissioner?
Well, thank you. I think most of my questions were answered probably in response to your questions, although there's a couple that I either addressed to the team here or maybe to the chief. And these are questions I think I might have asked on the front end just to better understand and put the discussion into context. The first question just is kind of a straightforward one. Do we have some idea of, when we just look at all of these facilities, I don't know how many facilities we're talking about and their general age, are these facilities generally that were built in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or are they newer facilities, or what are we talking about?
We have 5 open facilities currently, excluding the holding tanks in the geographical areas. Of the 5 open jails. They run the gamut. Some were built a long time ago using a linear jail pattern, something you would, a regular barred jail built back in the 1960s. Our newest jail is the Metropolitan Detention Center, and that was built in 2009 and opened in 2011.
And so that leads to then, with regard to some of these, I don't know, that were built in the 60s or just potentially even the one in the Metro, I think with regard to the facilities themselves, you kind of alluded to the linear design, and I think we know a lot more today about the best practices in designing law enforcement facilities that are designed for the safety of not only the personnel that work there, but also the inmates. How much of the issues, if you were putting all of the IG findings and the discussion here into context, how much of this relates to the facilities themselves and the effort to try to, for lack of a better term, retrofit with cameras, facilities for privacy questions, those kind of things? How much of the issues relate to the nature of and potentially faulty design of the facilities themselves, or I should say outdated design, and how much are operational and personnel related in terms of the actual operations and how they're operated?
Each one of our facilities has a unique design. Very few of them are alike. So we address each facility
Is that
individually.
purposeful, by the way, or just by happenstance in terms of when they were delivered?
It's based on best practices.
Okay.
What was best practices back in the 1960s differs from what's viewed as best practices today as far as facility design.
And Chief, do you have a view on just the broad question? How much of you add up the conversation we're having this morning, and I'm trying to just in my mind get an idea of how much of the conversation relates to the nature of the facilities themselves and the effort to try to, make do with what we have, and how much of it goes to how we're actually operating.
The remaining items, Commissioner, I believe are 100% related to the underlying design of the facility in which we're dealing with. That can be compensated by added personnel. The expense of those added personnel or material changes to the actual makeup of the jail is what is substantial and what we see as beyond, with the absence of cameras, beyond the medium spot of reasonable, given all the other pressing needs that we have with facilities. For instance, the Van Nuys facility was built in 1962, I believe. The Hollywood facility was built in the mid to late 70s. The 77th jail was built at the time in 1996, 1997, as I recall. And the most recent jail is now nearly 10 years old. So each of these were, as stated, a best practice at the time. And what we have left with us is, in the governance of jail operations across the state, is that they are grandfathered in. Those standards are seen as acceptable and appropriate given the date of construction of the facility. While we could invest millions of dollars to remove or replace or update these facilities to present-day 2019 standards, the pressing need for other facility requirements has overridden that. And so we're trying to strike a balance here with the remarks that we make here today and what we're proposing to be adopted.
Thank you. I would just say that my interest, and I know we've had a little bit of discussion about this before in connection with facilities, but my interest would be in really understanding, stepping back and understanding just the full picture with regard to facilities, not with the expectation that there would be an immediate infusion of resources to true everything up, but I think it'd be important to really know and maybe we already do now, but if not, I think it would be important at least to really bring clarity to what is the state of the overall set of assets that we're working with, so that we can initiate the conversation as to how it is to be addressed over some appropriate period of time.
And thank you, Commissioner. The City Council recently passed a motion, resolution for the department working with the CAO the mayor's office, and the facilities management committee to propose a public safety bond in joint with fire to again identify a path forward for the replacement and addition of new facilities, both to renovate the existing structure as well as to establish new structures for police buildings across the city. Our facilities are substantially dated. The West LA facility, for instance, was built in the late 50s, and same with Southwest and Foothill in the early 60s, and Van Nuys. So we are in a deferred or delayed maintenance mode substantially with our facilities, and we look forward to working with the mayor's office and our elected officials to establish a proposal for the restart, if you will, of the department's building and refurbishment plan that would include jails. For instance, Hollywood Station is one of the stations identified in one of the top 5 positions that would be in our priority list, which would include that jail.
So just to make sure, then, I know that we had some informal conversation, even less than what we just discussed here, about just the fact that there was some discussion of discussing it. And just I want to make for the record the formal request and suggestion that we set some time to get into it a little further so that we can understand really not only what the needs are, but what would be realistic in terms of request.
I would be there's the goal is a 2020 type bond, is what I understand, and we can have a presentation before this committee, before this board, within the next 45 days.
Okay, let's do it.
Very good.
Thank you.
Mr. Tiefeng, can you be sure that that is scheduled?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And I would also ask the department to continue to work with the use of force subcommittee or committee with respect to issues regarding these items in the report and the facilities issues Commissioner Bonner has specifically outlined.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, I'm sorry, was there something, Chief?
Madam Vice President, I would suggest, as it relates to items 14 and 15, that those both to be implemented require a special order. So in whatever motion that you would craft, that those 2 items would come back as a special order for Commission's approval. That would be 14 and 15, yes, sir. The ones that deal with the classification and investigation of in custody deaths.
Okay, very good. Let's take public comment, and then we'll get back to whatever action the board may take. Madam Secretary, are there public comment cards on item 2B?
Yes, we have 3 comment cards. We have Michael Novick, Zach Sherwin, and Adam Smith.
Mr. Novak?
Yeah, this is a typically bloodless bureaucratic account. So for the benefit of the commission members who were not on the commission when this first came up, and for the chief who was not the chief when it came up, and I think the IG was different too, let's say her name, which is Waukesha Wilson. When is a suicide not a suicide when it's inside? I think the idea of classifying any of these in-custody deaths as anything else but use of force is outrageous, and you should not just put it aside for a separate order, but reject it out of hand. Cameras are useless when minutes and minutes of the footage that was taken disappeared in the investigation. The intent of the chief to provide full, meaningful input to the board is meaningless when the previous chief denied the board the knowledge that subsequent to the decision that Waukesha Wilson's death was in policy, the department dismissed one of the employees involved in her death without so informing the board. So I think that you're being scammed. You should be aware of the fact you're being scammed, and you should reject most of the, particularly 14 and 15. The other thing that the Inspector General did not address is the question of informing the family members of someone who dies in custody. The parent of Waukesha Wilson and her aunt were not informed of her death. They repeatedly sought information. They went to court and were supposed to appear, and she never showed up. And they were finally told to call this number. When they did, it was the coroner's office telling her that Waukesha Wilson was dead. So I think that this is a completely inadequate report to deal with a problem that is enormous, and to treat it as something that is bloodless and bureaucratic is shameful on your part.
reading this report paints such a grim picture of the grind of the institutional grind of bureaucracy. And as we're talking about oh, it would be good to update this and that and to make these changes, but we're constrained by all these different things. I just think about all the people who are getting caught in the gears of this system while this deliberate pace is going on. And it's something that I feel compelled to make comment on. So I want to offer that as a general opening comment, and then I want to talk about a few specific things in this report. On page 3, number 5, we've been talking about the private space for these arrestees and inmates. That sentence, unfortunately, it is possible that privacy concerns were not considered. That's such passive bureaucrat-ease to describe this situation in which people who really would benefit from having privacy at these, I mean, I can even infer it from reading this report, and it's not an issue I've ever thought about before. Clearly, they're not getting it. It's clear that it's a financial concern. Later today in this meeting, we're going to talk about hundreds of thousands of dollars that are going to go for police recruitment. And I just think it's a sad comment that the mental health, the safety, because as the report says, safety of each individual is the paramount concern. That includes privacy and a sense, and a sensitivity to privacy concerns, safety. So that strikes me. I also, in section 9, when we talk about extensive mental health training, there's several numbers presented: 4 hours of training, 24 hours of training a year, 8 hours of training a year, 26 and a half hours of training a year. Those numbers are confusing, but none of them constitute to me extensive mental health training. And I think seeing that word in here is misleading and obfuscating. And finally, I'm glad Michael Novick said it before me. The use of the word suicide in this report is objectionable in general, and specifically with the still pending unresolved situation with Waukesha Wilson.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Smith?
Good morning. I just think that it's worth bringing up something that Jamie from Stop LAPD Spying brings up a lot, and that behind all of your words and your talk about training and operations and all these presentations, behind all of those are stories like Waukesha Wilson's, and also here today is the partner and the mother of Quentin Thomas's baby, who he died in custody, was killed by the sheriffs. And I know that's not LAPD, but it's worth you all thinking about, that there's stories behind all of this. And I agree with Zach and Michael that you talk about suicide. You should say at the very, very least, at the most, died in the custody of, if not killed by, because there's no such thing as a suicide when they're in your care or in your custody, because the word custody actually means care, if I'm not mistaken. So if they're dying in your custody, that's not suicide. And what all of this presentation doesn't reflect is why people are even in these fucking jails. People are being locked up for mental health issues that are being exacerbated in these jails. And so you're talking about what problems can be solved in the jails. How about stop fucking arresting people for being poor and having mental health issues in the first place? Mr. Bonner, you said how much of this is operational. That's the operation. Stop arresting people. Stop bringing people into these into these jails with extensive 8 hours of annual training.
We have no other cards on this item.
The recommendation was to receive and file the report, but Mr. Tiefenk, based on our conversation, I'm not sure that that's the action we've discussed. Is that?
That's correct, ma'am. My recommendation would be to, if the commission is inclined to, would be to approve the department's report and direct the department to respond back to the commission with special orders implementing recommendations 14 and 15 within a given period of time. And If you
And
wish,
I would add that, subject to any debate by the commissioners, that the department should work with the use of force committee on reviewing the facilities issues, the costs involved, and whether further improvements can be made with respect to that. Is that an acceptable motion? That's a second? Yes. So, Mr. Tiefenk, the motion would be to approve the department's report, to have the department report back and respond with a proposed special order with respect to items 14 and 15, and for the department to work with the use of force committee to review the facilities issues, including the costs, to enhance the improvements as recommended by the IG. That's the motion?
correct. And I would add 45 days on reporting back with the special orders for 14 and 15.
If I might, Mike, I would ask for 60 if I could. I just want to make sure that we get it right, and we will include that. That would also allow us to work with the subcommittee, and I would suggest the use of force subcommittee who's looking at this issue to ensure that the special order addresses all the concerns.
That's fine.
That's the motion. Is there a second? Second. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's 3-0. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 2C. This is the donation, and thank you very much for your presentation. Commander Choi, regarding the donation from the state of California. Commander, or should I say Chief? Commander. Could you give us a brief overview of what this item is?
Of course. Good morning, Commissioners. So in 2017, the department wanted to create a Narcan or naloxone program where we can go out and...
Could you speak a little closer in the microphone?
Where officers can go out and render aid to those individuals that are suffering from overdose from an opioid. From 2019 to from 1990 to 2018, according to the CDC, opioid and prescription opioid overdoses have increased fivefold. So we needed a way to address this for police or first responders. We started to develop this program for naloxone. We needed funding. We had some other challenges. Well, in early 2018, the state of California came out with this program from the California State Department of Public Health and Human Services, where first responders, LAPD, could apply for this grant and get opioid, and the medical oversight would come from the state, not from a local doctor or physician, which was required prior to this. So we took this opportunity. We applied first in, I believe, May of 18. We received 5,004 units, and then we applied for more in February of 19. Prior to that, but we received another 5,004 units in February of 19. In between that time, we developed a program. We came out with a chief of police notice that outlined the training, how to store it, how it's going to be deployed, what to do after it's deployed. We came out with all these protocols and a training program. And quite frankly, the training program came with the assistance of LA City Fire. So we said, how do we train so many officers so quickly? So the fire department conducted a train the trainer program for LAPD, where they trained all of our training coordinators citywide. And those training coordinators were tasked with going out and training their personnel in the field, and then issuing and assigning these units of Narcan individually to the officers, which they've been doing since that training that occurred in November of 2018. Currently, we have 6,155 units deployed. That's not only to patrol officers, but it's also to Metropolitan Division, SWAT, some of our civilians in property division that deal with booking of evidence that have opioids, or that deal with opioids or fentanyl, have Narcan as well. To date, we have had 17 deployments of Narcan in the field, with 15 of those incidents rendering life-saving aid to individuals. And that's really, we continue to have it deployed. We'll continue to track the usage and the success of it. So out of 17 deployments, 15 saves. It's an 88% success rate. It does have a shelf life. What I'm hearing is this program is intended to continue through the state. Obviously, when it does not continue or we can't get Narcan from the state anymore, we'd have to look for funding sources. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Questions from commissioners? Mr. Bonner?
A couple. One, by the way, just a quick one, by the way. What was the situation or outcome with the other two?
One was not an opioid overdose, and it did not have a negative effect on the person. That's what it's very, very safe for our officers to use. The risk is very low of us doing something wrong with it. Second one was the person was not able to be revived because the person was too far gone. FD responded and also used more Narcan and wasn't able to revive the person.
Thank you. The other questions are, I think you mentioned that something to the effect that the oversight is coming from state physicians or something as opposed to local physicians. Can you clarify that in addition to identifying if there are any major conditions or requirements that, mandates or requirements that come along with the grant?
Well, the mandates are that we have a training program in place, and also that we track the usage and we report back. We have those mechanisms in place, and they're part of the chief of police notice. The first part of your question again, I'm sorry?
Was to clarify the state oversight.
Correct. So prior to this program coming out from the state, if you were to deploy Narcan, you would have to have a physician that would sign an order saying, I'm overseeing this program. So for us, prior to it, when we started, it was the medical examiner at LAFD, or City Fire Department, Dr. Eckstein, signed a notice saying he'll provide oversight over the program. Since this program came out and the state's desire to get Narcan out far and wide, they identified a state physician that would oversee all the programs throughout the city that didn't have a specific doctor or physician oversight. And so you apply for it, they look at your program, their physician signs this standing order that lasts for a year, and we just recently renewed that with the new physician through the state, and they provide the oversight. And they just essentially review your program to see if it meets the criteria that they put forth, and ours does.
So the oversight is not the same that you would have if someone were receiving a medical treatment from a physician. It's it's programmatic oversight, it sounds like.
Yes, it is. And I think the reason for that, and again, I'm not a doctor, but the reason for that is after going through this training and listening to the fire department and these physicians talk about Narcan, the risk of us deploying it or using it on somebody that's not suffering from an opioid overdose and something going wrong is almost non-existent. It doesn't happen. It's very safe for our officers to use. And in the forming of this policy, the Police Protective League was very concerned that officers were out there deploying something as this medication. So this was all vetted out, and again, it's very, very safe for us to deploy.
And just another one that comes to mind then, in terms of just painting the picture of how some of these incidents actually unfold, are these individuals who are conversant in any way, that have any role in either consenting or not, accepting or not accepting the administration of the drug, or just describe the...
Out of the 17 that these were deployed on, all of them were unconscious, not responsive, and they were literally revived from being unconscious.
But the protocol contemplates either situation? In other words, it doesn't have to be somebody who's unconscious. I'm asking also just what is, maybe you can just describe this way, what is the protocol when someone arrives at the scene and then makes that determination to...
Well, so the training doesn't address whether somebody's physically conscious or unconscious to deploy it. What it does address is if the first responder believes this person suffers from an opioid overdose, and to get them through that until they can get medical attention, you can deploy this Narcan.
And Commander, what would lead an officer a first responder to believe? What are the physical symptoms that we generally or historically have seen?
Well, I think the key indicators is non-responsive, still has a very low pulse rate, unconscious. oftentimes you'll see in these, so each time it's deployed, an officer does a 15-7 and reports back how the circumstances were. And the vast majority is you also have witnesses saying that this person took whatever heroin or whatever it may be and is unconscious now. So then we know automatically to deploy the Narcan.
So it seems to me there's a number of factors that are evaluated, or data points, if you will, that are evaluated in order to make that determination.
Yes, and each being unique to the incident itself. The officer has to make that judgment out there when they arrive on scene whether this is going to be helpful or not. But the chances of it being harmful are very, very small. So I think they would, and we ask them to err on the side of caution and deploy it if they think they're overdosing from an opioid.
Thank you. Okay.
Other questions? Very well. Do we have public comment on 2C?
We have one card. We have Jamie Garcia.
Ms. Garcia?
So on the surface, this program seems beneficial. It seems like a response to the opioid crisis. In some ways where we are, engaging in life-saving techniques. But I want to step back a little bit and just again kind of demonstrate how we see this kind of mission creep of LAPD into communities' lives. When we talk about the opioid crisis, we need to speak about what services are needed for people so that people don't get in this position, right? But what happens is that as LAPD infiltrates itself into our daily existence, right, as mental health providers, coupling with social workers. Now we're talking about medical intervention, right? And we're not even getting to the specifics if it's a sub-Q injection, if it's an intramuscular injection, if alcohol swabs are going to be supplied, are gloves being used? Like this kind of discussion is not being talked about at all. We did get to the component of consent, which is really important as well, but we're getting this blanket this physician is overseeing it programmatically, there is no adverse effects. But just being a nurse and listening to this, I'm like, well, we're not even getting to the specifics of administration, right? And who are needles being reused? How are the needles being disposed? What are all these intricacies, right? Because LAPD is not medical professionals. And you may think this is funny. You too may laugh, right? Because this is the health and wellness of a community. But again, this is the infiltration of LAPD taking on these roles that they are not responsible for, nor should be intervening in our lives, because medical professionals need to be a part of this process. We need to have services in our communities, but this is where the resources go, where LAPD starts to become part and parcel of everything, where there has been multiple students, young folks that want to get involved in the communities this way, but don't have the resources because LAPD is constantly in our lives taking that money.
Ms. Garcia, thank you.
Commissioners, just for clarification, the administration of this is through a nasal injection, if you will. There's no needles. There's no...
Inhalation, that's what it's called. It's not an injection into your nose.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Is there a motion, Commissioners? To receive the department's report and transmit to the Mayor and City Council? Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? It's 3-0. Thank you. The next items on the agenda is items 2D and E. I'm going to take them together for purposes of the presentation. Members of the public who submitted public comment cards, they're listed as two separate items. They'll be, you'll have time on each item. But both donations are proposed to be from the police department from the police foundation relating to the marketing and recruitment to add to the diversity of the police department. Chief Baeza? You're the lead?
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Chief, Mr. Mark Smith and Mr. T. Fank. I am Deputy Chief Martin Baeza. I'm the Commanding Officer Personnel and Training Bureau. And with me at the table is Mr. Vartan Yayigian, who is the Commanding Officer of Personnel Group, and Captain Aaron McCraney, Commanding Officer of Recruit and Employment Division. Just as an overview, I wanted to discuss and give you a little bit and frame the picture in regards to the reason for the donation and us being here today. As a result of our continuing efforts to support and enhance the department's marketing and recruitment diversity goals, 2 donations were provided to the Los Angeles Police Department to further these plans. One was for $100,000 from the Weingart Foundation, and the second was $250,000 from the Ballmer Group. And today we'll be speaking about the $350,000, combined donations. That is part of a $1.3 million budget to address our diversity goals in the long run. Just to give you a little bit of background, the department has forecasted that in the next 5 years, over 400 African Americans are projected to leave the department through attrition, which encompasses about 43% of the Los Angeles Police Department population. That's 54% female and about 40% male. Over 190 Asian Pacific Islanders will also be attriting out, which is about 25% of the Los Angeles Police Department population.
Chief, could I ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt you, to go back to that figure you stated? I thought you said 400 African Americans are scheduled to leave the department through attrition?
Yes.
And then you said...
And the breakdown of those 400 is about 43% of the Los Angeles Police Department population. African American. The African American population, correct. And then the further breakdown of that population is 54% female and 40% male. And then we are also looking at the Asian Pacific Islander population, which we're anticipating 190 Asian Pacific Islanders to also leave through attrition, and then over 600 female police officers to leave in the next 5 years. As a result of that, in looking forward and preparing the department to maintain our strength and also our diversity, we are putting together, and we have put together, a plan in order to address diversity hiring. And Mr. Yayigian will be speaking specifically in regards to our plan for this $350,000 that is going to get us started in addressing our objectives of keeping the strength of the department while also keeping the diversity up.
Thank you, Chief. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start explaining the first $100,000. Oh, I'm sorry, yes. I'd like to explain the first $100,000 and explain where it's going to be spent and why. The first $100,000 will be used to continue and upgrade our candidate relationship management program, which we first initialized in April 15th. This is a program that brought us back to modernize our systems in a way that we can actually measure our progress in hiring our candidates, be able to measure and track the bottlenecks, challenges, and give us the opportunity to restructure our processes. When we introduced the CRM program, we were able to identify the challenges and issues that we had for many years that we couldn't have visibility to it. Now that we have the data, we would like to use the $100,000 to revamp our processes so we can hire our candidates much faster, much better, in better quality, and shorten the time from, let's say, 190 days to less than 60 days in hiring process. This process alone will help us to actually effectively help the diverse group that we're targeting to hire, because most of the time it's the diverse candidates that fall into the cracks of this long process of hiring, and it delays them from being hired, and we lose many of our diverse candidates through the delay process. The next $150,000 that we would like to spend is to actually modernize our examining process. Today, we use a manual, very task-oriented essay process that it takes us several weeks to understand who passes the test, who doesn't pass the test. And it's often very subjective, and it may have biases that we cannot identify. So we're changing the process into the multiple choice testing where other law enforcement is already using this process. And we're going to use this funding to integrate the multiple choice testing process as part of our CRM program. So the candidates seamlessly, as they complete their applications, same time, after the completion, they can actually take the test online and also be proctored online. And this will actually revolutionize the way we're actually treating the applicants initially. So this process will cost us about $150,000. We have the contracts, we have the capabilities to implement these two major programs. The final $100,000 is actually going to be increasing our current 1-2 punch of social marketing programs that we have. We're going to collaborate with personnel department and spend the funding on two major initiatives that we use. These are the big ticket items that we use currently, but we don't have enough funding. By using this funding, we can actually do better targeted marketing, social marketing in areas where we're looking for to increase our diversity. So the first $18,000 of that $100,000 would be direct Facebook and Instagram ads. That's an annual expenditure. And the next one would be $82,000 for Google ads, which we currently use. So that wraps up pretty much the $350,000.
So if I could just add, what we're looking to enhance our relationships with our existing vendors, and we're also looking to expand our social media profiles by using a strategic approach in regards to using geomapping in order to target zip codes that would help us achieve our goals. Captain McCraney is going to touch a little bit on our output and what our expectations are of how we're going to track this, and in regards to what our expectations, our goals, and our objectives are in regards to achieving our long-term goals and also our short-term goals of meeting and maintaining our department numbers.
As you know, we work very closely with the personnel department. They have been in charge of taking care of our marketing. When it comes on the department side, we've been primarily in charge of doing the actual boots-on-the-ground recruitment. We've done a very good job with that in the past. However, we're looking at ways to enhance how we do our recruitment efforts. And I think the direction we're looking at more is to relate to today's environment, and so we have to go more for social marketing. So we're looking to enhance the good work that the personnel department is currently doing and to add to that. Our goals as far as our success with our output of this is that we're looking to maintain our workforce of 10,033, but at the same time to further diversify how that looks. Chief had mentioned earlier about the attrition rates that's going to occur. So with that, we're looking at on an annually basis, to add at a minimum of 100 African Americans. We're looking to add at a minimum 195 females and a minimum of 45 Asia Pacific Islanders. And we think that will help us to address the pending attrition over the next 5 years.
So just as at the end of this conclusion, we'll open it up for questions. Our goal, and like I mentioned when I started this presentation, this is the beginning of a long-term plan to address our diversity and hiring needs. We have the plan in place, but one of the things that we want to absolutely do, and we're going to meet with the recruitment subcommittee of the Board of Police Commissioners in order to make sure that we address concerns and also answer questions and also even take input in regards to it. Because we haven't received this money yet, this is our plan to move forward as we actually start to implement the strategic goals that we have. So having said that, we're available for any questions you may have.
And Commissioners, if I could just add on just for a broader discussion on this. The department sees this year. First of all, we're thankful to the City Council and the Mayor's Office. Through their leadership, the organization has been earmarked $750,000 for its outreach and its recruitment efforts, particularly in its diversity initiatives. This is the first time in some years that this marketing monies and this outreach and recruitment monies have been provided to the department. This is going to allow the department to, we believe, reset and begin an annual process of an ongoing effort. Each year we hire between 450 to 550 personnel. And in an employment market as difficult as it is today, with near zero unemployment by some economists' estimates, we know that there are young people and mid-careers that would and are attracted to law enforcement and would be viable and successful candidates if we can get our department and our information to them. We believe that this marketing and recruitment effort through social media, through travel to locations such as historic black colleges and other locations that have job pools of individuals who are looking to start and initiate a career, that targeting those efforts plus improving the process itself so that it is a viable process for a young person looking to start a career and not one that takes today in excess of 220 days on average for a person to be hired. And while that's a substantial improvement from the 1 year plus that period was a short time ago, we look to have that process improved through these investments that's been identified to less than 90 days on average. Mr. Vartan's words of less than 60, music to my ears.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We intend to amplify this so that we remain an employer of choice for those wishing to enter qualified entrance into this profession.
Thank you. A procedural question first with respect to items D and E. If approved, it seemed to me we're approving the acceptance of the grant money, not necessarily the plan. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That, from I don't want to speak out of turn, Mr. T. Fank, but that's my understanding. But we wanted to sit here and let the police commission know that we had a plan and explain to you what the utilization of that money was going to be for, and how it has been earmarked in order to support our hiring and diversity goals.
I appreciate that. And part of the reason I asked that question is I was a little confused from reading the written materials and hearing your presentation, because it sounded from the written materials you were going to hire a marketing firm to do a lot of this work. But
yes,
from your presentation, it sounded it was mostly internal. Have I misunderstood?
Well, no, because this, as I mentioned before, this is the first $350,000 that is we're actually going to be able to spend. And as the chief mentioned, we have an additional $700,000 as part of the bigger budget, as part of the bigger strategy in utilizing the entire budget. We are going to hire vendors and advertising firms to help us identify efficiencies, working with the personnel department in order to streamline the hiring process to under 90 days, our target being 60 days. So yes, that's part of the bigger strategy. This particular $350,000 that we talked about, I just wanted to identify what our plan was to utilize this money to get us started as we move forward into the fiscal year and we have access to the budgeted money that was given to us. We have identified areas in which the chief has spoken about of utilization of the money. One is exactly that, hiring vendors to help us assess our efficiencies, hiring advertising firms that have a specific niche in the diversity groups that we're interested in. Also, the travel of reaching out to the historical black colleges, and also the purchase of equipment that we are looking to help our candidates improve on, with upper body strength through our candidates assistance program, just to name a few. So we do have a larger scale plan, but today's conversation, we just focused on the donation that was.
I understood. I understand. Thank you, Chief. It's wonderful in many ways that the City Council has now allocated money, and certainly wonderful that private donors are stepping forward. I think the intent about creating a far more diverse workforce in LAPD is incredibly important. I will say my initial impressions is that your target numbers are way too low for what my expectations would be for women and people of color. that particularly with $1 million, and if City Council is willing to continue to fund this, we should have much higher goals, in my opinion. But I will also say, I think it's very challenging, in my experience, when hiring processes have stopped and then you try to reinitiate them, there's always a challenge of getting the startup costs going and modernizing procedures and all, which I understand, but I do think we need a more robust plan moving forward. And I would ask if the department, if we approve this, that working with the recruitment committee to be sure that there's a solid outline, and any members of council who need to be involved because they have allocated these funds. There needs to be a consolidated effort to achieve those goals.
Absolutely.
I did have some questions about the personnel department, but you've answered those. Will there be an RFP that goes out?
Absolutely. The process is that we want to make sure, we've actually been in the process of interviewing certain vendors in order to identify best practices so that we can form an RFP in order to put it out. So yes, and the RFP process will be put out.
Okay. And hearing your broad plan, I'm not, well, let me rephrase that. How do you know, or what research have you done to ensure that this is the most effective way to spend money to achieve the results that you're seeking?
Yes, okay. So the research is several pronged. So the first of the research, we looked at inwards to identify what kind of challenges do we have currently that we're not able to deliver. And we have internal bottlenecks and challenges, systems, and also training issues that we needed to spend some funding and resources in order to improve our own capabilities to deliver a better and faster product and services. The second component was to look at what is available from outside. What do other law enforcement agencies do? What do other better companies do in relation to marketing, recruitment, onboarding, and also retention? Retention is also another key for us to look at, after all this money and investments that we spent, how do we retain the candidates in the process, and how do we retain them in the academy and so forth after they're done? The final component is to look at outside, what kind of companies do we have that actually readily are the best in the market, or so to speak, have the best practices that can actually teach us or work with us for time being to not only educate us what we need to do, but also be partnered with us in a long run to always fine-tune our processes. So in that relation, we've done a lot of research. We've done a lot of reading, a lot of meetings. We've been doing this almost 2 years now. Initially, we started with Mayor's innovation team, and then it started into a collaboration with personnel department. So that's how we were able to obtain funding for the CRM program, which was actually the light of the program because it shed light on our challenges and capabilities, what we couldn't measure before. And we always talk about measuring the challenges in order to have the ability to fix them. Then now we have the ability to measure, and now we're working on the fixing process.
Okay, but how do you know that the proposal for spending the money, which I understand may change because this is your preliminary, is effective at recruiting African Americans, people of color, and women?
So we're measuring the reach.
Because I don't think other departments are particularly successful in doing that.
Some departments attempt, just like we do. Some of us have some success, and some of them may have other successes. So we're learning through the process. So the key point for us in marketing is to be able to reach our community members, to be able to discuss our brand and have our capabilities available for the young people to understand what kind of career and opportunities that they're missing, that they could have. So the reach is very important. But also
in social marketing, because there's so much competition out there, it is also important the repetition, the impression of our data and analysis. Where do we go? How often do we go? And how long do we stay in those areas? And that's why we have Google Analytics. That's why we have Google Ads. That's why we're talking to LinkedIn and 6 or 7 other vendors that we've already interviewed and looked at their product. And we're also comparing how do successful companies use those products and how do they increase their sales or their profitability. And even though we don't have sales and profitability, but we're also looking for human resources that could possibly be our organization's future in that particular manner.
And Captain McCraney, can you speak to within your command the review of best practices, what's going on across the industry, the challenges we're facing as a profession, and what our research is, and what ongoing nature that's helped shape this plan?
Yes, Chief. We've been out in the community a lot when it comes to doing our recruitment, when it comes to diversity. One of the biggest challenges we find is trying to overcome the perceptions of what it is to be a Los Angeles police officer, the relationships it is with the community and the police department, so that we find that when we're able to have these communications, we're able to address these on a personal level, that's really given us a lot of traction to move forward, to have people to become interested in the police department who perhaps in the past never have before. We've done a lot with some organizations. For example, we do a lot with the Divine Nine, which is a group of fraternities and sororities of the 9 black fraternities and sororities. Made tremendous inroads to just having that dialogue, understanding and getting them to understand exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish by having them become a part of the police department.
In addition, we've attended conferences with the Police Executive Research Forum, as well as participated with the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Both organizations have identified, as well as the Major City Chiefs Association, the challenges that law enforcement across the country has relative to building a diverse and highly qualified workforce. And today, and while that challenge has ebbed and flowed, we believe that this combination is the best manner of improving the systems. And I expect that as we learn more about CRM and we actually dig deeper into it, we'll actually find more barriers or artificial barriers, things that are stopping and interfering with our successful recruitment, not just in time, but in applicants. I'm looking forward to our visits. They have scheduled 3 different visits to historic black colleges, in which there's 5 colleges in that area of each of those visits. So those 15 campuses that we see us touching this in the next 6 to 9 months, the Asian Pacific Islander outreach in those areas, again, similarly in scale. And as we look in those areas, I think we'll learn more about what is the message that we're delivering to correct the perceptions or to inform the perceptions to attract candidates here. So this is by no means this is going to evolve over time, but I want to stress that the numbers that we've identified are at least twice the pace of what we've achieved. And most recently in this last year, for instance, in the hiring of African-American applicants, we've hired more African-American recruits in this past year than we've hired in any of the past at least 3 years. And yet it's still half this number. And so we need to do better. And we hope that these efforts are going. We look to these efforts to both inform and also allow us to achieve these goals. And I join with you, Commissioner Decker, with the desire that the proportionality of the next 450 to 500 recruits that we hire, that we beat the pace. 20% African Americans is what this current goal is, just short of that. Again, I would love that number to be, would appreciate that number being higher, as well as women. In our organization, our goal is to move past the 20% representation in the sworn ranks to achieve 22 to 25%. And to achieve those goals, we need to clock at a higher proportionality than we have. And this is However, I also want to establish goals that, while they're ambitious, that we have the ability to build to them. This is, I will say, in this last year, the first year that we've established numeric numbers behind our hiring processes, which in and of itself, I think, has helped improve focusing our recruitment efforts into the communities in which we best need and desire people to come from and join us department, so we can better serve and build trust in all the communities that we work in.
Thank you, Chief. I certainly appreciate those comments. I maintain my view that the number should be higher.
Absolutely.
And I further maintain my view that there needs to be a specific plan to hire more women. Every time I hear recruitment plans, there's no specific plan to engage more women in the process. And in the future, I'd really like to hear that. Other questions?
Sure. One, I think, is, if I'm understanding from a process standpoint, that you're addressing today both items together, the $350,000, but you were mentioning this is part of a broader program that is yet to be fully developed. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. Our focus here was to give an overview of the larger picture, but in particular the $350,000 combined donations. So yes, this is part of a larger program in which we have spoken about.
And one observation I think that you likely would share, I think, is that it's a good time then really for us to engage a little more intensely, I think, than heretofore has been the case. Certainly speak that for myself, and because I would say that I kind of receive it with a fair dose of skepticism. Not with regard to the goals or the intentions or that, moving in the right direction, but because the issues are so complex in terms of really what we're trying to do. So, and they pervade, they're not just LAPD, they're the Sheriff's Department, they're throughout the law enforcement system. And so there's a lot of, there are a lot of issues I think that I want to make sure are being contemplated, and that we just not feel good that we're using some new bells and whistles with Facebook and LinkedIn and all those things, and maybe they're not getting us as far as we want to go. So we'll need to engage on that. One, by the way, I wanted to go back just also to one kind of process point about the donation itself. You were mentioning at the beginning of your remarks that was the $100,000 from the Weigart Foundation and then the $250,000 from Balmer. Is it that just from a process standpoint, is the foundation used as the conduit for which to receive and allocate those donations? What I'm wondering is, on the agenda where there are references donations from the foundation, which is identified also in the background report as the donor, but it's also pretty clear that and there's nothing I'm suggesting is nefarious or problematic about it. I'm trying to achieve, just make sure I have the right transparency.
Yeah, when we work with the Police Foundation, they'll reach out to certain donors that will have an interest in the certain topics that we're interested. In this case, we reached out to the Police Foundation and laid out our plan and made the applications to address what we were interested in. I'm not exactly sure how they reached out to the Balmer group.
So let me go into this discussion. To the Commissioner Bonner, to your
Mr. Smith,
question.
please don't speak out. We'll hear from you during your public comment period.
The current protocols.
Mr. Smith, next time I'm going to have to ask you to leave, sir. Please don't do that. I don't want to do that. Chief?
So the current approval of the monetary donation is to use the 501c3 of the Police Foundation. Individual donors, particularly of this size, are also called out for awareness and the transparency of understanding. Both the Weingart Foundation and the Balmer Group and their foundation, I have worked with as far as their interests in our department's ability to deepen its diversity, specifically with women, African Americans, and Asian Pacific Islanders. Both of these groups also have high expectations of understanding how we're going to go about doing that. in today's presentation is some of the discussions we've had informally with them about how we see this being done. So it is the ability of the organization to ask the foundation for this monies to go through them and for their donation to us, and we're attempting to comply with the administrative code and the requirements of the city relative to this formal acceptance. These matters, upon approval, should we gain your approval as a board, because of the monetary amount being above $15,000, will now be forwarded to the city council for their review and consideration, ultimately the concurrence of or acceptance of the mayor.
Thank you. And that does, I mean, so it is the case that really this is the process by which donors get the donations from their coffers to the city and the department.
Yes, typically.
Yeah. What I'm saying is you couldn't accept a donation directly from either the Weingart or Baumler Foundation of this size, could you? Could we?
I believe, Commissioner, I believe we could. We're following an established path on this. We have accepted donations from stated donors directly to the department, and those have there have been examples of that as well. So we've seen this done both ways. I will say that the foundation and their administration pass no costs on to the donors, so there's not a user's an administrative fee or anything like that in their shepherding these funds to the department.
In the other semi-substantive point on this line is when you go through this process, if we take action on and approve this going forward, goes on to the council for the review as well, right?
Yes.
And one question and one area of continuing concern really is when you add all of this up, I know there's a set of issues as well that really need to be addressed by the personnel department. So I don't know, like I know we're making the change here to go from the essay exam to the multiple choice exam. There's also some issues around the interviews. I understand still some continuing issues around the interviews, some continuing issues around the criteria relative to past drug history and abuse and some of those kinds of things. So I also want to make sure that we, and this is not necessarily with regard to women per se, although I'd say we need not just more women, but even more African American women, right? So it's a similar point. But the point is that I want to make sure that we make a solid effort to really identify what those other potential barriers and roadblocks are, so that whomever's responsibility is to address them and to understand them can really start to look at it and help address them. Because otherwise, we run the risk, I think, of creating the appearance of a compelling program, but maybe it's only compelling as far as we can get it with what we have to work with. As opposed to where we're going to need some other assistance from other parts of the city government. So I want to make sure that we do that, isolate those areas along the way. And then lastly, I think that when we get to the point of potentially engaging some other firms to look at some of the best practices and so on, I think, again, I'm going to have some skepticism there simply because my assumption is if there were some other experts who really nailed this, we'd all, not only the police department, but the sheriff's department, a number of we'd all be doing better in this area if that were really the golden egg, so to speak. So it doesn't mean we shouldn't make the effort or something. I'm just simply saying there's a lot of firms, marketing firms, that will come in and tell us that they want to spend a certain amount of time to review our operations and do a lot of things. And we might just find that we'll get a nice report that may or may not really be actionable or may not be impactful for what we want to do. So with that's one key point. And the other is I want to make sure that we are realistic and sober and clear with ourselves, but also with the city, entire power structure of the city, that there's some other things that need to be done in order to help achieve these goals.
So Commissioners, I met with Miss Macy, the General Manager of Personnel, and the AGM with this very group that you have before you today just 2 weeks ago, and discussed candidly our desires, not just in our marketing and outreach and recruitment, but in the process improvement, including barriers, or what we see as barriers that's interfering not just in the processing of individuals and the timeliness of that, but also qualifications, what constitutes a qualified candidate. the multiple question test, as an example, is something that we have been pursuing, Ms. Decker, when you may recall, when in former position as Deputy Mayor of Homeland Security and Public Safety. This was an issue relative to the narrative portion of the essay, its time, its subjectivity, whether or not it was truly needed as a qualifying entrant point for all applicants. And today, I'm happy to see this multiple test questionnaire be used as a replacement, but we're challenging that other agencies use 2 years of college or 60 units as a passing point rather than requiring the candidate to go through the multiple tests, multiple questionnaires tests, and that we're challenging such instances of these requirements as impediments to us reaching and achieving better recruitment of results. I'm happy to say that the relationship between the personnel department, its general manager, myself, and the individuals working on this is very good. It's open, it's responsive. We are currently also looking at the polygraph exam and its impact and what it provides and what it doesn't provide. And we've asked for more specific examples of the personnel department's belief that that is a necessary item on all individuals versus doing it as an ad-needed basis. So let me assure you that this team, using not just the analytics of CRM, but an awareness of what actually is occurring in each of the process, including interviewing and talking with recruits themselves, both those that have passed and those that have not, is making every effort to pull this fishbone apart and identify efficiencies and means of improving the stated goals that we have. And I look forward to not just achieving those goals, but surpassing them, and for this organization being a leader. I hear your air of skepticism. Our team has it as well as to whether or not how much marketing can actually achieve, but we've got to go out there. This is different this year. What's different is that those levers or those avenues have not been open to us before. They've been on life support, and so we need to exploit this, see what we can learn this next year, and determine. For instance, yesterday in this presentation, in advance of this, there was a question of billboards. Well, why aren't we using billboards as a marketing effort? And in years past, there's been billboard groups and so forth that have volunteered to post billboards. And what our team is finding with successful applicants, qualified individuals, is that billboards are not what draws them into a job prospect. However, we also know that, for instance, in our investment with the Los Angeles Sentinel and our presence in churches throughout particularly South Los Angeles, that we're also trying to influence family members and parents and uncles and others that have a son or daughter or a young person that's in a teenage or early 20s or mid-30s that would find this profession attractive. So that's a secondary investment of recruitment efforts and engagement. And each of these are, I think, part of the ambition. I'm proud of this group because their ambition is to continue to try to find new ways. We've re-energized the group with new and I think people who have a fresh set of energy in the recruitment and outreach and engagement, particularly for these targeted diversity groups. So I'm optimistic with some skepticism that we're going to achieve our results.
Are you optimistic as well? You mentioned the personnel department being open and responsive relative to the responsive element. Because what's needed here, in my opinion, is a partnership throughout every corner and level of the structure, right? So ideally in the next report, we'd have someone from the personnel department potentially join the conversation also to address their perspectives on areas where we may not have achieved the objectives that we're looking for, or the ask that might have been made there. That might be helpful as well. But I'm focusing on this because of the multifaceted nature of the process that goes, I think, beyond the collective will and interest of the people in this room. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to make sure that there's full sharing of the objectives, but also the accountability for how far we're getting in achieving those objectives as well. So I just make that point. Lastly, if you mentioned some of the successes. I don't recall from some of the discussions we've had before if we've seen and if it's even possible to bring forward information relative to what has been successful over, say, the last 5 years. So if we look at every African American recruit that's come through the process in, say, the last 5 years, what do we know about? And my guess is, some cases it's been some direct effort that has come from the department. In many cases, it's been something that no one here can or should by any way take any credit for. So what do we know really about the people who are here, like what brought them here in the first place? You might even comment on your own personal experience if you care to.
Sure. Yeah, I think that probably the biggest area we've had success in is working with our local churches. Right now, we're working with 13 of African American churches in the Southern California, Los Angeles area. We do a lot of engagement. For example, this last Sunday, we were at Fame. We're at Fame Church, and we did a presentation there for 2 services, and we got some good participation from the congregation, asking a lot of questions and getting involved. As the chief mentioned earlier, we've done some outreach with the HBCUs.
Excuse me, mind you, so what I'm asking is not necessarily for further explanation of the efforts that have been made. What I'm asking for is information about, if we interviewed or if we captured information, if we looked at every African American that's pinned on a badge in the last 5 years, what do we know about what it is that brought them here? That's what I'm asking is do we have that kind of information, or can we get it in some way?
So we can most certainly get that. I don't know that I have something specific to say right now regarding what they've done.
No, I appreciate that. That's what I'm saying. I think it'd be helpful for us to look at some real situations, right?
Sure.
To look at where we have been successful. Obviously, the fact that somebody's here suggests that there was some success. So I'd say let's also make that effort to look at both with regard to African American and women, like what's been successful and where the lion's share of candidates really come from in the last several years, both in the case maybe of what's been successful and maybe what hasn't been successful. But let's start looking at some data there. Did you care to comment on? I don't know. I can't count the number of bars on your sleeve from here, but you've got some experience here. Just from personal experience, do you care to comment on what it was that attracted you to the department in your particular case?
I find that a lot of people in the community, it's something that they want to do. A lot of people grow up I grew up in the city. Many people that work in my recruitment division that are recruiters actually grew up in the city. They have a love for the city. They have a love for the police department, but they just find that because of the historical past, that's been an inhibitor for them to move forward and have people come onto the job. For me personally, something that I've always thought about, something that I wanted to do. I initially started in a different direction, but I was always kind of pulled back towards this. I can recall I worked in a bank, and I remember I had a friend of mine that I grew up with that came into the bank, and he was in his uniform. And I was so proud to see that person, African American that I grew up with, that was actually a police officer. And based on that type of influence, that encouraged me to move forward and change careers and go into the police department. I can tell you my story is told over many, many times with something very similar, where something that, they grew up, had respect for the police department, and just felt a need and a draw to come onto this department.
When was that? Again, I'm trying to do the math here, but when was that?
I came out in 1991.
91. So part of the point of that, from my perspective, is a lot of things happening in the city around that time.
Yes.
And including, with and through the department, and many of the same challenges that are faced today in terms of the branding, the reputation, the concerns in the community have been part of the legacy that we've managed over time, and yet in some cases we've been successful in nonetheless recruiting people from all parts of the city. So I'm just making that point as well, that as challenging, it's a different set of dynamics leading to where we are today, and that are no less difficult, but I think there's still opportunities to make headways beyond what we've achieved so far.
If I can say, I totally understand where you're coming from. I can appreciate that. My family, as many other African American families, came from the South, like during the 40s. They came through the Great Migration. They were dealt with some challenges here when with the city, with the police department. I think a lot of those historical feelings are carried over from one generation to the next. But with that said, even I can say with my family, even though they came at that time, there was never any negative thoughts or feelings regarding me coming into the department. Actually, they were very supportive, and I find that's very true in many communities, in the African American community, in many families there. I think one of the objectives for us is to be able to share the opportunities and the availability of being a police officer with these people that perhaps have not had the exposure that I got or others got, or able to see it in that light.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Commissioner Goldsmith?
Thank you. I want to echo my colleagues' great interest in this, and particularly in recruiting more people of color, but specifically African Americans, women, and specifically women of color and African American women, and appreciate the work on that. And I remember, I participated with Matt Johnson in a couple of meetings with a group of foundation executives to try to push this idea a couple of years ago. And I know there have been so many one-on-one meetings with these foundations and additional presentations to try to get them to support this. And I know it's taken years, not to mention all the work you had to do with the personnel department and others. And so I just want to thank you and congratulate you for getting this far. It really has taken too long, but I know that you've done everything you can. And I think part of it was, I share the skepticism of my colleagues in general, just about marketing efforts and recruitment efforts. But I know that you all wanted to move ahead 2 years ago when we first started presenting this to foundations, and it was their skepticism that really slowed it way down, and they had very high expectations for wanting to see very specific plans, absolute best practices, all the data, which I appreciate. But I also just want to urge us to move forward. As the chief said, we've got to get out there. So I think we need to balance doing it as well as possible with getting it done quickly, because what we're facing is a very rapid rate of attrition, particularly among African Americans, that worries me, and I know all of us. So I appreciate the effort to just move forward and do something quickly. And I also appreciate the work that the mayor's innovation team did a lot of work on this, and you guys have continued to do work in terms of identifying opportunities where implicit bias can enter into the process and trying to eliminate barriers to applying and getting hired, particularly for the communities that we are most interested in engaging. And I don't want to, you all, thank you for asking the questions you did, and you addressed most of my questions. I don't want to take up more time here, and I'm glad that there's a subcommittee that's working on this. And so just encourage the subcommittee to, again, we don't need to do it right this minute here, and I don't personally need to know all the details, but I would love to know that the commission and the committee is aware of some of the specific items that the department is prioritizing in terms of interrupting that relationship between implicit bias and behavior and decision making, and also some of the specific ways that we're reducing barriers. Given that I know this funding only gets us a certain amount, so I know it's not everything. So I imagine you have a priority list. Again, don't need to go into it here, but just encourage the committee to know that, and I will have faith that we collectively know it, and that it is our estimation that is good, and that some of the skepticism is addressed, ideally without slowing down the process.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, how many public comment cards do we have on D?
We have 5 cards on D.
And on E?
5 cards on E.
Are they the same individuals?
4 are the same on both.
So as to those 4, you'll get 4 minutes instead of 2.
Okay.
And could you read off the first?
The first 4?
Yeah. Please.
Michael Novick, Adam Smith, Jamie Garcia, and Sahara White.
And do these individuals all have multiple cards or just one? I'm sorry. I don't know which individuals put in for both.
Oh, these 4 have cards on D and E.
Oh, very well. So Mr. Novak? Oh, sorry. Then Mr. Smith, you have 4 minutes, sir. Right. 4 minutes. I'm told I should clarify, sir. 4 minutes to respond to both together. Apologies.
If we have to listen to you all carry on exhaustively, you can at least put us on the mic. So you all talked about the presentation was very broad, but the chief here did provide an idea of like itemization, if you will, for this $350K. including the CRM, the Candidate Recruit Management Program, to get it working faster and better quality. You talked about the $100,000 going to Instagram and Google ads, collaborating with the personnel department for targeted marketing. What else? Modernizing the exam process, those multiple choice tests. I hear that. But I just wanted to note that the report that you'll actually be approving, that Chief Moore signed, not this chief, talked about funding sources will be used to host events, provide vital training and mentoring to various groups in the community and at various venues that target diverse community members, etc. So, as someone that's been to events before, I know that those can cost a lot of money. And so I guess, Mr. Bonner and Ms. Decker, I'm asking, with all any due respect to the two chiefs here, which one's telling the truth about which way the money's going to go? Because this presentation didn't talk about any venue rentals or events were being hosted. So I guess when you approve this, just, maybe go to sleep with that tonight, that all of this was wasteful. I wouldn't speak for any community that you're trying to recruit, because I'm thankfully never going to be in that community. But, you're up here talking about the recruitment of the African American community. And one of the things we always bring up is these meetings being here. Like, why aren't you having this exhaustive conversation in the black community if you're talking about recruiting them? And I wonder if maybe, Metro Division, for example, arresting and pulling over black people at 5 times their population share might have something to do with the recruitment problem. Or that, gentrification in general and the black community making up 5 times their population share of the unhoused community. The captain here talked about historical past, but those are very present things. What else was I going to say? Oh, where's Steve? $100,000 from the foundation that he sits on the board of, and he didn't show up today. I know that you all have different, ideas of what your role here might be, but I'm wondering, is that, not a conflict of interest? And, no one sits on the board of the Balmer Group, but we're talking about a group that gives hundreds of thousands of dollars towards the community safety partnerships. And now you're talking about going into those communities and using more money from this foundation to recruit black and other folks of color. I mean, the Weingart one is just ridiculous, but all of these donations are ridiculous. You had this hour-long presentation. You asked all your questions, and the report that you're going to approve doesn't even talk about any of the shit that these guys just said. Congratulations.
Ms. Garcia? And you have 4 minutes.
So, I have to second that this is pretty interesting to get 4 minutes, because often we have to rush through everything we want to say. But I want to address something that Shane Goldsmith kind of, in some ways insulted and put us down about being abolitionists. And, when we speak about modern day abolition, we do speak about not wanting the police in our communities. And we are not ridiculous in the sense of thinking this is something that's going to happen overnight. This is kind of goes back to my previous comments about how police departments are infiltrating every component of our lives and sucking resources from our communities. And I think, because the way that, militarized individuals think about social control, which is what they talk about, is through violence. There is no other form, anything else they represent, because what they represent are machine guns, are guns, which they have right here, tasers. These are the ways that they deal with the community, right? And Adam also spoke about stories, right? Because behind every violent person that you want to categorize. And the words that LAPD often throws around to talk about people of color, black people especially, is gang, right? Gang, gang, gang. As if these are not people with histories. As if these are not people that have experienced various forms of class, race, gender discrimination. If these are not the forgotten people, right, that could have used the social worker, the nurse, the counselor, the physical educator, the public health person, the community interventions, the researchers, the writers, the artists that would change the way this world is, right? Would actually change it. And all they need is that love and attention, but not this kind of violence, right? But now we're talking about this kind of misperception of the community and how they see LAPD. But I also wonder, do they want to be a part of a liability? A part of a failed system that not just once failed, but fails repeatedly, right? Because we cannot have amnesia, and we cannot forget about generational traumas that exist that again incorporate race, class, and gender, and the poverty of lack of what we need to be successful, what we need to actualize ourselves, right? So this is not a perception problem. This is a reality. Rampart scandal, the consent decree. Now we're getting into the failures of data-driven policing. I don't need, my anger and my frustrations come from the constant need to expose to you all and to educate you all on what is going on, because you don't know. You don't know what is happening. And that is obvious because, again, when we look at Laser, they're just putting people's names on lists. They're just whoever they want to target. Because these are just gang members, right? Because that's the way we dehumanize people, and we allow for violence to come in and to control us and to be a part of putting people in cages. They're not jails. They're cages where they die. They die of drug overdoses. They die of this kind of infestation of not only bacterias and, everything that goes from being put into a cage, but yet you want to go into our communities and you want to recruit us and you want to make us have amnesia and think that this is not a failed system. We do not want this violence, and we do not want you making us think that this is not failed, because we know, and it's not a perception problem, it's a reality. So I say, where else could this money go? Where else could it go? You may be militarized people. You may have a penchant for violence and social control and believing that that is the way, but we do not. And Shane Goldsmith, that is what an abolitionist is. We believe in something different, and we will fight for something different, and we will constantly expose this
Garcia.
failure.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, who is the next speaker? I'm sorry.
The next speaker for 4 minutes is Sahara White. And then we have Hamid Khan on D and Zach Sherwin on E. Is Sahara White? You want each item? Okay.
I'm
'cause
sorry.
Your card only says
the
D.
first speaker is Shahara White for 4 minutes.
Sahara White.
Sahara White. I'm sorry. Ms. White.
Okay.
I say forget the diversity right now, because that's obviously some bullshit to act like you're trying to reform. What you gonna do, target and hire vulnerable people and teach them your same bad habits? You trying to go to college campuses and recruit specifically people of color so you can try and throw them off their path of achieving possibly a degree in the medical field, for example. Instead of the community getting a real certified nurse and doctors, you rather give them officers with 8 hours of training per year, which probably are 5-minute videos you watch and click through to complete. It's not like you need to go to school or attain a degree to become an officer. You guys are picking and choosing what matters most. You don't pay for your gym membership before you pay your rent, meaning you don't spend money on things you want versus what is needed most. The core problem is you guys are too violent. You are supposed to be here to soothe and protect our people, not bully us around and murder us. Earlier he mentioned most important is repetition, but you stay repeating the same mistakes. The mistakes you are supposed to have training for. You are more worried about selling your brand as an officer than you are practicing being an officer. The logo up there says to serve and protect. It's supposed to be serve and protect for our people, not It's supposed to be for our people in the community, not to serve and protect your white supremacy.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Khan, I think you're up next, sir. Was there just one card submitted?
Yeah, and I just put D because I thought it was for both. So, anyways.
He wants to speak on both.
I'll give you the 4
Great,
minutes,
thank
sir,
you.
if you want it.
So, we've talked a lot about the militarization of policing over the last several years as well. And this is a classic example of when we compared with the actual Department of Defense, that what does it mean for a department to have economic power, political power, structural power, and the whole cultural narrative that they weave constantly over here. One of the things that needs to be lifted is the role of private donation and the private money. Because if we are to go back in the times of slave patrols, if we have to go back in the times of Jim Crow, if we have to go back in the times of segregation, still all of that continues. If we have to speak about redlining and enforcement of redlining, if we have to speak about the quarantining of Skid Row communities by Pretpol and the hotspots, we're looking at a whole history of private money that controls policing, private money that controls private property, private money that needs police to protect and serve private property holders. That's the history that we are looking at. So then we bring into this moment, the issue of diversity and diversity tactics, right? Let's look at diversity tactics. Baltimore PD is one of the most diverse and has one of the largest, African-American police force in the country. Let's look at the history of Baltimore PD. Let's look at LAPD. When you look at the population breakdown of the city of Los Angeles, the LAPD generally reflects, the population breakdown as well. But when you look at the work that they are doing, when they look at the murders, the violence, the conspiracies, the corruption, that's what it is. Because as the old saying goes, it's not the white or the black cop, it's the blue cop. It's the institutional prerogatives. It's the uniform that represents the corruption and violence of a department. So when they talk about diversity, when they talk about people of color, and students have spoken very eloquently about how recruiting young people, if it's, yes, there are people. I grew up in Pakistan. The only track that people have, who don't have money, who come as peasants or farmers, either you go into the military or you go to the police or you serve the state. So I have family members who are cops as well. And it is very clear that they state that we check our humanity at the door because we are at the service of the executive. And the executive is who controls the money over here. So they're at the service of property holder and money. So when we look at these things, rather than this whole priorities, earlier we had a conversation not even having private space for people for their intakes at holding tanks. Not even having private space. We've all experienced it. We've sat down on benches, under handcuffs and just in chains. Just these are personal experiences. It's humiliating. But here we are, constantly expanding, and that's why I brought in the militarization of policing, that this country has been at war for 238 years. There's never been a single year that the US of A has not been at war. So this is the whole militarization of policing, of waging war on the people, that who is in control, who's representing what interest, and ultimately it comes to private property. Shane Gold is the president of Liberty Hill Foundation. The sheer conflict of interest is palpable as well. When we look at it, on one hand, on one side of the mouth, speaking about social justice, on the other side of the mouth, speaking about and presiding over this mass violence and corrupt institution, rather than spending the resources and opening up the way that we are being marked, the way we are being tracked, the way we are being impacted, the way we are being stalked, the way we are being killed, the way we are being humiliated, the way we are being verbally abused, the way the taunts happen, the trauma that happens. It is about adding more people to the roles. So that's where our fight is, and that's why we come here every week, to expose this bullshit and expose this violence.
Thank you, sir. Madam Secretary, the last person, I'm sorry, I didn't get
Zach Sherwin.
Mr. Sherwin.
I'd also love 4 minutes, though I probably won't use all of it.
In fairness, I'll give it to you, sir.
Thank you. I'm opposed to both the Ballmer grant and the Weingart grant, but that Weingart grant is especially egregious. A previous speaker brought it up, but just to say it, you're an oversight commission. The president of your oversight commission is on the board of directors of a foundation that's going to give $100,000 to the cops. Now, he's on record as saying he's not impartial, that he's biased towards. There's that interview that's out there with Steve. If you haven't read it, it's an eye opener. But or maybe it isn't to you. But it's so blatantly a conflict of interest that it just it's difficult to wrap my mind around. And I think on those merits alone, it's incumbent on you to not let at least this item 2E go through. I mean, let alone all the arguments that are being brought up again and again by speaker after speaker. But on that alone, the conflict of interest is so blatant. I will just say that I went to the Weingart Foundation's website and looked at the grant page, and it speaks to their core values. And core value number 1 is treating people with dignity and respect. And even if you can't smile in recognition, I think everybody up here, including you, knows that Steve does not treat people in this room with dignity and respect. I understand you can't react to me with your face or your body language, but look inside yourself and know that that's absolutely the case. Commissioners, all of you are saying the hiring goals are too modest, they're too low, you're skeptical. That skepticism is actionable. Don't pass these items through. Reject these, especially when you ask for clarification and explication and you don't get meaningful responses. I'm smart and I listened hard to what this man was saying, Ms. Decker, when you were asking for clarification, and it was gibberish. I mean, he's throwing buzzwords at you and social media tech speak at you and not engaging with your concerns in a meaningful way. I listened as closely as I could because I was keyed into the moment, and it's incomprehensible. And when you expressed your skepticism about hiring goals to the chief, his response boiled down to, you may be skeptical, but I'm optimistic. Well, you aren't optimistic. You're skeptical. So where does that leave you? But you're the one who's got the power to act on that skepticism in this room right now. So I urge you to do so. And finally, I will just say to Mr. Bonner and especially to Ms. Goldsmith, when you ask questions that push back against these things, I noticed in both of you a sort of a chuckling, almost like an apology for the question that you're asking, and sort of explaining and saying I'm not asking because, or I don't mean to imply that anything's nefarious or problematic. You don't need to apologize and explain why you're asking questions. It's your job to ask questions, and I just want to tell you that as a community member observing your behavior up here on the dais, it smacks of a deferentialness that I think that an oversight body should not be displaying. There's so many reasons not to let this thing go through, and while I'm not optimistic, like the chief is, I hope that you won't vote for this.
Thank you. I have a question for the city attorney. A number of members of the public indicated that there was a conflict of interest. I'm not aware of any, but I'd like to ask you with respect, Mr. Soberoff's not here today, but can you advise us
there
if there's
are two
anything
things. One, Mr. Soberoff's not here. If he was here, he would have to recuse himself. The second thing is that the actual acceptance is done by the city council. So they will have this matter before them, and they can discuss, and Mr. Soberoff obviously is not on that body, but it would be the city council that would accept this donation.
We're just proceeding to send it
You
to
are
the city
accepting,
council.
my understanding, with the
We're
recommendation.
receiving and transmitting.
You're receiving the report and transmitting it because you don't have the jurisdiction for the amount to accept this high of an amount.
Excuse me, Mr. Smith, I asked you in the past, please not shout out. I'm following up on questions that you all presented. So my understanding, there's no conflict at this point for the commission that we can proceed ahead with the action indicated on the agenda.
The board may act on this matter, yes.
All right, thank you. With that, the recommendation, as stated in the agenda, is to receive and transmit the report to the mayor and city council for acceptance. I would amend that to say that the department is to work with the recruitment committee or subcommittee, I forget which it's called, the recruitment committee in developing the plan of action.
Yeah, and just to clarify or make sure we understand the motion, because as you've stated, I think all we're doing is authorizing this
to transmit to
proposed
the city
donation
council.
to be transmitted to the city council, and the expenditure of any funds and the implementation of any plans is something that's still going to be subject to further conversation along the lines suggested in your motion.
Further oversight by this body. Is that correct, Mr. Tiefenk? We have that authority, correct?
Oh, certainly, ma'am. What I would, again, I think in your motion, making it very clear, is that you're recommending you're accepting the report, transmitting to the mayor and city council for their final acceptance in accordance with the administrative code, and you're directing the department to work with the recruitment subcommittee of the commission to develop the expenditure of the funds.
Correct. That's the motion on the table. Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. For clarity, that was for D and E, a joint motion. Any member of the commission have any issue with that? Okay. All right. D and E passed 3-0. Moving on the agenda to item 2F, the department's report relative to ethics enforcement section quarterly report. Captain Vargas? Any questions?
A couple.
Hello, Captain. Can you give us a brief overview?
Yes,
And
ma'am.
Chief, good morning.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Captain Alex Vargas. I'm the Commanding Officer of Special Operations Division, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have regarding our quarterly report.
And would you introduce your colleague as well?
Yes, ma'am. Next to me is Deputy Chief Debbie McCarthy from Special Operations Division as well.
You're welcome.
Professional standards.
Special standards, yeah.
Captain, could you give us a brief overview, sir?
Yes, ma'am. So I'm here to present the quarterly report for the first quarter. We have done 18 integrity tests. About 2/3 of them were random, and 33% were specific. That's a number of 12 to 6. We had 12 passes on the integrity test, 1 failure, 14 attempts, and then 1 result is pending. For the personnel complaint intakes, we had a total of 18 as well. 17 passes, 1 pass with comments. None of them are pending, and no failures. That's a total of 36 total tests for the fourth quarter. For the breakdown of the passes, that's 80%. Failures, we had 3% with 1, and pass with comments was 3 as well with 1, and then 1 pending. I'm new to SOD. I've been there for about 2 months now. So I did ask for a breakdown for the past 3 years of a breakdown of our tests and going back to 2016, just to be a comparison from what we have this quarter to the last. And so with the 80% passage, it's in line with the 78% passing for the past 3 years, with the low of being 73 in 2016, 86% in 2017, and 75% in 2018. So we're in line with that number. For the failures we've had in the past 2016 to 18, a 5% failure. And for this quarter, we've had 3. So that's also in line with that as well. And in the past with comments, 1 with 3%. And for the 3-year period I discussed earlier, it's about 5% as well. Any questions on those topics, ma'am?
Commissioner Bonner will ask.
Sure. Good morning. First of all, since this is a report, I think we've maybe seen one of these in the past, 1 or 2 since I've been here, so I'm still getting somewhat familiar with them. And it's my understanding that some of these tests originate in different ways. Sometimes there's a specific request, or there's something that's referred, and in some ways, or in other cases, something else causes someone to decide they need to proactively take a look. So my question is about Table 4 on page 6 that sets forth the number of tests by misconduct category. And the question really just is, when I'm seeing that with regard to constitutional policing, stops and searches and seizures and so on, there are 0 tests in those areas. Can you just put that in some perspective and kind of explain, since they're areas that we talk a lot about in other contexts, and we have other reports that identify issues of concern in these areas. Can you just explain why there's no tests in those areas?
Yes, sir. So we again, in looking at the 2016 to 18 numbers, those fall in line with these numbers that we have as well. And obviously, through every quarter, we will explore different areas we want to focus on. But we try to look for trends and patterns through disciplinary issues that we see and try to match those up. So in 2016 through 18, if you look at the breakdown of these intakes and stuff, I would say for neglected duty, that seems to be the number that we focus on the last 3 years as well. So we try to pair up with those numbers historically that we've had.
And
throughout the
Captain,
year.
if I can, Chief McCarthy, can you talk about the why in the constitutional policing stops, seizures, and searches? What are there particular issues or challenges in randomized operations as far as integrity checks on this, or what is the essence of why we chose neglected duty, discourtesy, and complaint intake in relationship
I
to
think what Captain Vargas is trying to say is typically we look at what the patterns and trends are and we go with the patterns and trends. We have started to do intakes on bias policing complaints because we used to do just complaints, whether someone took or did not take a complaint, and we've made the essence of those complaints bias related. I don't know why they don't fall under there, but we have made those complaints bias related to see if people are taking complaints regarding bias. In terms of other issues, I'm not sure. On page 6, what was the category? I'm sorry. What was the title of the category?
This one here.
I can't see it. You have to read it.
Yeah, number of tests for misconduct.
So in terms of related to specific issues with stops and other issues of bias-related activity, what we do is we look at, there's a number of ways we get these. We get them from outside the department, inside the department. We review personnel complaint face sheets for patterns and issues, and then we set up tests for those kind of issues. So if they come to us, we do that proactively. We do that in terms of tests at the desk, tests in the field, and we'll have to look at how we're categorizing those because I know we do some. And I'm sorry I'm being a little ambiguous because some of this we'd have to talk about in closed session.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But I think, hopefully you get my point that
yes, no,
to
absolutely.
me it just looks funny, and I'm saying this as from a layperson's perspective, that a lot of the conversation that we have, a lot of the reports that we receive from the IG and others relate to these areas, these issue areas. So that's why it seems hard for me to understand why there's no test in these areas that come through your process. There may be some logical reason for that, but that's what I'm still searching for.
There actually are some, so I'm not sure if it's the way they're categorizing them because I know that I've directed some that have happened.
We need to go back at this and look at this.
Absolutely,
because
we'll
I
take
think
a look at it.
the aspect of discourtesy, the complaint intake process, I think you deserve a better answer in the sense of stop, seizures, and searches related to constitutional policing, procedural justice. Those are things that I'd like to go back and look at this and see if we have a categorization issue here or if there are actual inspections that we should be conducting.
Well, based on some of the ones we've conducted, it seems like some of them may have fallen under other categories. So under like neglect or, like I said, we very specifically go after bias policing in terms of intake. So we just have to look at making sure that they're categorized properly because I'm aware of some we have done.
Yeah, we've done 6 in the past. The first quarter, we did 6 bias policing complaint intakes, and I think what it is they fall into the category of the complaints on neglected duties for not taking the complaints.
So we can make sure that those are captured in both ways, so it's clearer.
Okay, well, just subject to any other questions or comments from the other commissioners, my request, I think, would be to put this over and subject to maybe coming back with a little more explanation, really, as to how we make the proper sense of the data as it's presented.
Yes, we can do that, and then if you have further questions,
so
we can cover
let's
them
put this over for a week. I did have additional questions, and sorry, my technology failed for a moment. So thank you for taking over, Commissioner Bonner. I did have questions on the integrity tests as well. So if we could do this next week and get a more in-depth explanation. Excuse me, do we?
I just want to ask the department, can you come back in a week?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So we can get a more detailed explanation.
Right, and if there's something specific you want, but like I said, if we go into detail about the tests, we would ask that we do that in closed session.
Right, but I think to answer Commissioner Bonner's question about where are the
absolutely. We can do that.
categorization,
Mhm.
yes.
And it may come to some time where that may be appropriate as well, but at least the current questions are about what we can talk about in the public presentation, and then
Yes.
we'll understand if we need to take anything up in closed session.
Is there any objection from the commissioners putting this over 1 week? Well, then, let me ask Madam Secretary, are there public comment cards we can take now?
We have one. We have Hamid Khan.
Mr. Khan?
Yeah, I know you're gonna come back in a week, but I was surprised that there's an old saying that the fish rots from the head down. That there was no test conducted for captains and above. So captains, commanders, deputy chief, and of course the chief and the assistant chief. So when we have, and just a couple of months ago, one of the reports you referred to, the laser report, stating that the commanders were telling people to manufacture basically reasonable suspicion to stop people. So this is something very critical. That how come the commanders have a rank immunity from these ethics tests? I mean, that's a question. Because it's just once you make captain, you are free to operate anywhere, because there was zero tests conducted for captains, commanders, deputy chief. So I don't know what that game is all about, but if it's going to come back in a week, we would like to see that explanation that why those tests are not conducted. Yeah.
Khan, that was it for public comment on this item?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you next week. With respect to item 2G, which is next on the agenda, Chief Peters?
Do you need a motion?
And this is the issue relative to home garaging authorities for vehicles. Sir?
Yes, Commissioner, good afternoon. John Peters, Director of the Office of Support Services. I'm joined here by Sergeant Susan Michaels from Administrative Services Bureau. The report is pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to repeat a lot of the information, Commissioner. I think that what it will draw your attention to is we are asking for the approval of 1,082 home garaging authorities, and looking at a 3-year analysis, and we have lowered that number since fiscal year 2017-18. We were at 1,146. 18-19 we were at 1,110, and we have scrutinized the list even further. This year we're looking at 1,082. As the report lays out, there's 139 that are MOU mandated, another 287 reference motorcycles, and then the reviewable ones are the ones that are the bulk of them, the 656. In that review this year, we had 36 new requests. The board approved 11, we denied 25, as well as we revoked 39 of the existing home garaging authorities that were there. So that's where we end up with the 1,082 and requesting that for this year.
Chief, is it the reviewable 655 or 656? The report said 655. I just want to be sure we have that right.
Yeah, it's 650.
There was a typographical error at 656.
Yes.
656. All right. Thank you. And can you explain, Chief, for the reviewable ones, what is the process that is?
Yeah, so there's basically three broad categories that we look at. One has to do with the tactical response, so those entities that require a tactical response to an unanticipated or unusual occurrence. The second thing is those positions where folks have an investigative responsibility and their investigative response to ongoing operational and technical support incidents. And then finally, the management response to emergency call-outs and off-hours inspections and overseeing these types of situations that occur.
And just so I'm clear, the expectation is individuals who have these vehicles are expected to respond to incidents 24/7.
That's correct, yes.
All right. Very good. Do you have questions? Commissioner, do you have questions? Public comment on this item, Madam Secretary?
We have none.
Is there a motion then? A motion to approve the department's report. It was made by Commissioner Goldsmith, seconded by Commissioner Bonner. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? 3-0. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Item 2H, relative to the request of a payment for an award. Captain Brockway?
Good afternoon, Commission.
Good afternoon.
Mr. T. Fank, Carl Silligaro, Ms. Silva, and Chief Moore and Inspector General. Thank you for having me. With me is Commander Alabrada. He's the Assistant Commanding Officer of South Bureau. Sir, anything? So we are here to... Yeah, my name is Billy Brockway. I'm the Commanding Officer of South Bureau Homicide. We are here to request the Police Commission to approve and review a special reward payment of $75,000. The $75,000 was utilized to identify, apprehend, arrest, and convict a homicide suspect. A quick rundown on the homicide. Back in January 10th of 2015, our victim by the name of Jose Escobar and his friend were in the area of 59th and Crenshaw collecting cans. A suspect walked up to them and made a statement of, "Where are you from?" and fired numerous rounds at the victims. Mr. Escobar was struck and he passed away. Our detectives exhausted all leads in the first 4 months and requested special funds from Council District 8 of $75,000 and to do a press conference to try to get new witnesses to come forward to help identify our suspect. On June 12, 2015, the reward was submitted to Council District 8. On September 8th actually, we did a press conference, and within one day, our witness came forward and identified our suspect. Our suspect was subsequently identified, apprehended, arrested, and went to trial. The suspect was a 32-year-old gang member from Los Angeles, and he was convicted on January 17, 2019, and sentenced to 106 years in prison. So I humbly request that the Commission approve this $75,000 allotment to pay our witness. Any questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions from the Commission members? No? Are there any public comment cards on this item?
We have none.
We have none. With respect to this, I'll move that the Commission approve the Department's report and transmit it to the Mayor and City Council. Seconded by Commissioner Goldsmith. All in favor? Aye. Any opposition? No, it passes 3-0. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, item I, the Department's report relative to grant application and acceptance of the award of an ABC grant. Captain Lee? Good afternoon, Captain.
Good afternoon.
Can you identify yourself and just give us a brief overview of this item?
Yes. Good afternoon, Commissioners, Mr. T. Bank, Chief Moore, Mr. Smith. I'm Captain Cynthia Lee, the Commanding Officer of Detective Support and Vice Division. With me is Sergeant Lee Garcia. He's the officer in charge of the ABC unit. In front of us today, we are requesting the acceptance of a 2019-2020 Operation ABC grant. We have been the recipient of this grant for the last 24 years. This grant provides, or will continue the funding for the citywide implementation of Operation ABC, which is a comprehensive enforcement and prevention effort to identify disorderly outlets, reduce ABC incidents, violations, alcohol-related incidents, and it allows for the salary payment of the unit has 2 sergeants. One is paid for by the department. This grant allows for the second payment of salary for the second sergeant. They assist in helping vice units. There's a task force with Planning Department, Building and Safety, Fire Department, LA County Public Health, City Attorneys, Citywide Nuisance Abatement. And they provide training to over 32%. There are about 6,300 ABC licensed locations in the county, and 32% of those are in the city of LA. So they provide STAR training, which is a standardized training for alcohol retailers to get everyone on board on what they should be doing, the do's of don'ts of having the ABC license, and just doing a lot of enforcement and education. And so I am asking that the board allow us to accept this grant so that we continue doing what we're doing.
Thank you, Captain. Are there any questions from commissioners?
Just one, and this is, I'm familiar with the grant and me having had oversight of ABC for some years. What I don't recall was how much of the work is done in connection with the task force, jointly with ABC and other departments versus solely within the department.
Sir, excuse me. Good afternoon, sir. We conduct at least one multi-agency operation each month, and we do other smaller operations with ABC. So I work with them fairly often.
But if you were adding it up, I mean, is the lion's share of the effort that will emanate from this grant, is the lion's share of the effort in connection with the task force, or is it primarily LAPD personnel?
It's primarily for LAPD personnel, sir.
Thank you.
Commissioner Goldsmith? Are there public comment cards on this item?
We have none.
In that case, I will move to approve the department's report and transmit it concurrently to the mayor and the city council. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? None. It passes 3-0. Thank you very much. Thank you. Chief?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Relative to my weekly report of significant events as well as crime and personnel strength numbers, in regards to this last week and this significant events, probably the most striking was our efforts in addressing the rumored ICE operations, ICE as an organization, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and their enforcement sweeps that were rumored to be occurring here in the Los Angeles region as well as other major metropolitan cities across the nation. I joined with Mayor Garcetti on Friday to put together a video, a short vignette relative to reminding all of our community members their rights and the aspect of the role or lack thereof of the department in regards to these rumored ICE operations. We wanted specifically to identify that we would, as a department, play no role in the ICE operations that were, again, being projected as to occurring beginning this past Sunday. We have seen over this last couple weeks an increased level of apprehension on a number of communities here in Los Angeles, and both in press accounts as well as in advocates that we continue to have open and ongoing conversations with. We look forward to continuing to try to quell concerns and certainly identify clearly that the LAPD needs and depends on the active involvement of all of our community members, and that we will play no role in this civil immigration enforcement initiative that's been discussed, and also identify that we are that in that ongoing effort that engagement is that an officer coming in contact with anyone in our communities that they should not fear us, that our role there is to help and support them. Secondly, this last week, with the direction of Mayor Lightfoot from the City of Chicago, a contingent of city officials as well as community groups, including gang interventionists and members of the Chicago Police Department, visited the department over a 3-day period of time to observe how department operations go, to the efforts of violent crime reduction, particularly shooting violence, to look at and examine our CompStat process, the means in which we go about our internal audits, our management processes relative to what we've learned from our experience with the going through the consent decree, And lastly, seeing our gang reduction youth intervention efforts that both championed by the mayor's office and administered, as well as our engagement as a police department, embracing those intervention and prevention efforts in our ongoing efforts to reduce gang violence in our communities. It was a good exchange. It's one that I believe that as those men and women left to go back home, we benefited from as much as they did, as we exchanged ideas and our collective commitment to improve the safety of our respective neighborhoods. I also was out and about with in the community on a couple of different meetings, including the Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council meeting, as well as took some time and met with the U.S. Attorney Nick Hanna to talk about priorities involving the U.S. Attorney's Office, particularly towards human trafficking, gun violence, and efforts that he can do to help support us for those that are involved in domestic violence as offenders that have previous convictions and are continuing in their violence, particularly armed with firearms. And additionally, on Sunday, met with and was encouraged by a group of chief and senior executives from throughout California and the western United States at Claremont University to talk about local challenges and the national context of policing. I sat with a panel of other law enforcement executives and spent a couple hours with these up-and-coming senior executives as well as chief officers, again, as we share and explore best practices, what's working, what our challenges are, what we see as opportunities for the future as we go about our work to improve the safety and trust of the communities in which we serve. This past week, we had one categorical involving an in-custody death that I'm going to briefly talk about, as well as yesterday responded to an officer-involved shooting that involved uniformed LA school police officers. And in our relationship with the LA Unified School District Police Department, we conduct both the administrative and criminal investigations of any of their categorical in those categorical uses of force. First, relative to an in-custody death that occurred on the 14th of July at approximately 5 o'clock in the evening at the Metropolitan Jail here in downtown. Individual, male Hispanic, 57 years of age, and I'm not identifying him as his family. We're still efforting to locate and notify his family of his passing. But this individual had been arrested on the 12th of July at about 4:30 in the afternoon by Central Area narcotic officers. They arrested him for possession of a controlled substance, and he was booked and housed at the Metropolitan Jail section. And approximately 5 o'clock on the 14th, an officer assigned to Custody Services Division was conducting cell checks when he observed an individual seated but unresponsive in his single-person cell. The officer entered the cell and contacted the individual who remained unresponsive. The officer and additional Metropolitan Jail Section personnel initiated CPR and notified the LA Fire Department, who responded. LA Fire Department personnel, as well as our personnel, were unable to revive the individual, and at 17:29 or 5:29, it was determined that this individual was deceased. There was, at this preliminary investigation, there was no evidence of a suicide, and there was no force that has been associated with this incident. Force Investigations Division responded, as is customary, to assume the investigative responsibility. The Family Liaison Unit has also responded to this event in an effort to locate this individual's next of kin. And the Office of the Inspector General was also notified and responded. And this information I have at this point is very preliminary, but those are the facts and circumstances as we know them today. Relative to the officer-involved shooting involving the LA Unified School District, it occurred on the 15th of July at approximately 11:10 in the morning. At that time, uniformed officers of the LA Unified School District Police were flagged down by a victim of a theft. That victim was in a pickup truck and was chasing who the individual believed were the theft suspects, who were also in an additional pickup truck. This occurred in the area of 86th Place and Main Street. One of the individuals later identified as Mr. Ever Quintella, and a second individual by the name of Mr. Brandon Zavala. and the victim, identified as Mr. Donald Ray Jones, reached the intersection of 86th Place and South Broadway. Both vehicles attempted to conduct a U-turn, and when they did so, the police officers, this uniformed school police officers, attempted to intervene by blocking the intersection and exiting their vehicles. Mr. Jones, the victim, stopped his vehicle, but the other two individuals in the other vehicle did not. Instead, the driver, Mr. Quintella, attempted to drive, reportedly, between the driver's door of the officer's vehicle and the southeast curb of the intersection, resulting in an officer-involved shooting. Mr. Quintella was briefly treated at the scene by LA Fire paramedics and then transported to a nearby medical center where he received further treatment for 2 gunshot wounds. He was later released from the hospital that same day without having surgery and was booked at the 77th jail for assault with a deadly weapon. One of the 2 involved officers was transported to a nearby hospital where he was treated and released with a fractured leg that he sustained during this incident. As I said, Enforced Investigations, as is our protocol and agreement with the LA Unified School District, responded and is handling the administrative and criminal investigation, and that upon completion of that investigation, the evaluation of that use of force is a matter before the board of the school district and not the jurisdiction of this panel. Let me move over to our crime. In Part 1 crime, we continue to see a reduction in overall crime this year of 6.9%, which is an improvement from last week. That's 4,755 fewer Part 1 crimes. Of that, 668 are fewer violent crimes, and we continue to have a reduction in year-to-date in homicides, with 134 homicides this year-to-date versus 144 last year. That's as of this last Saturday. Our challenges continues to be in the area of the area of increases in victims shot. That number has remained about 45 additional victims shot this year versus last. So again, as I reported the last time I spoke about this, that surge that we saw, the spat in April and earlier in March, has really abated, and we're now somewhat on scale with what we have seen earlier. However, I will say that even though these numbers are encouraging, we still have far too much violence and far too many shooting victims in this city, and our efforts to work with our communities and build trust and lower the instances of violence is ongoing. I report each week about officer-involved shootings, and I will do so again. Year to date, we have 13 officer-involved shootings. That's 12 involving a hit or the officer's round striking an individual, and 1 non-hit. Our numbers last year at this point was 20 officer-involved shootings, and our fatalities this year are 6, and last year that number was 9. In looking at our 4-year average, the number of officer-involved shootings at this point would be just under 25. So we continue to see a decrease in the overall percentages involving officer-involved shootings. Regarding traffic collisions, we're effectively even on our serious injuries and death-related traffic collisions, and we have motor vehicles versus PEDs remain effectively flat. 280 serious injuries and death by motor vehicles versus PED this year versus 282 last year. An area we have seen some improvement has been our bicyclist-involved collisions, where we've had 7 fatals this year involving bicyclists and other motors, and last year that number was 10. Finally, moving over to our personnel strength, we are currently at 10,026 sworn department personnel, 2,952 civilian personnel, and 385 reserve officers. We just started a new reserve academy here in the last week and a half, and we have 1,484 cadets in our cadet posts. And that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions the board might have.
Questions from the commission? No? Public comment cards?
We have 2 comment cards. We have Jamie Garcia and Hamid Khan.
Garcia?
So my comment is just, I guess, bookkeeping for the coalition and just getting some stuff moved. Moore spoke about CompStat and the analysis and, policies and review of CompStat. I just wanted to send out a reminder that we have an outstanding public records request from November of 2018. And we're receiving a plethora of maps, a plethora of mission sheets, which will all soon be public, which is great because it'll analyze, it'll demonstrate to the community actual targeting of police, the targeting that's happening, the movement of laser zones, the laser zones that stay stagnant over years. But the essence of the PRA is really being ignored, and it's concerning because it makes me wonder, as Leon here has expressed and told me in conversation, which I think also convoluted something on the public records request that we haven't gotten a response to, but stated that there is no policy for the creation of anchor points. That he believed there's no policy, and he believes there's no policy for the creation of laser zones, how that is administered. And which leads me to believe that this is probably true because there was no policy or whatever policy, the outline of the policy you had for the selection of the chronic offender bulletin was not uniform throughout the departments and pretty much didn't seem to exist, or if it did exist, it was being violated continuously. So I just wanted to remind you that that's what we're looking for. We're looking for how you create the anchor points. We have documentation that demonstrates that they are somehow based on calls for service, but we want the actual policy, and that's written there. And we want the policy that's written on laser zones. But if again, we're going to expose that maybe none existed, I think that, again, that'll be problematic and allow the community to further dive into what the impact of this program truly was.
Thank you. Mr. Khan?
Yeah, I just want to pick up where Jamie Garcia left as well, but on a similar note for Michael Moore. And, his almost, I don't want to say data-driven fetish, but almost this being wedded to this idea of data-driven policing, which continues to be completely discredited. So last week, or a couple of weeks ago, the LA Times did an article on Predpol, and in which they outlined several things, but it was one of the many other assessments and articles, and of course the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition just did a detailed report as well on the complete failure of this system. And I want to read you a quote from the chief executive of Predpol himself, Brian McDonald, said that, and I quote, that the software was never intended to be the solution to reducing and preventing crime. Okay, so this is clearly stated by the chief executive of Predpol. And he goes on to say that it's virtually impossible to pinpoint a decline or rise in crime to one thing. And then he says, going back to Mark Smith's audit, that I'd be more surprised and suspicious if the IG found Predpol reduced crime. So now this is coming directly from the chief executive of Predpol itself. I know that there was this debate on April 9th and April 12th. At one point, Dale Bonner, you mentioned that why don't we put it on pause? But of course, Moore's not going to do that because this whole idea of data-driven policing is really a facade. It really, really is a facade. And it's really a waste of time because Palo Alto has gotten rid of it, and this is coming from the newspapers. Rio Rancho, New Mexico, has gotten rid of it. Hagerstown, Maryland. So there are numerous police departments who have gotten rid of it, because it's costing money. And they are not seeing anything of value in this program. But somehow, and I know now we are twisting it around and moving into precision policing, but Predpol has to stop. It is completely a waste. It does nothing.
Thank you, sir.
And the CEO itself is kind of just saying if it reduced crime, I'll be surprised. So
thank you.
Think about it.
We'll move on to item 4 then, public comment. Are there public comment cards?
We have 5 comment cards. We have Kimball Jemison Diener, followed by Zach Sherwin, John Avalos, Jamie Garcia, and Hamid Khan.
Sir.
Hello. This is my actual first time speaking before you, but I have a question. I don't understand what's going on. Why am I under this surveillance with the police department when I've never had any gang affiliation, never been arrested, have no criminal record, no ties to any terrorist groups of any kind from the study and research that I've done. I understand that it's LAPD working in conjunction with other organizations, be it police, community policing, DARE, and all these other programs. I needed to stop. I've had one failed suicide attempt because of the stress and the anguish that this has put me under, and my family as well. I also have video footage of these things happening, as well as the police helicopters that repeatedly hover the house really low, where you hear the blades cutting through the air for no reason whatsoever. It's a continual harassment that I'm completely fed up with. I have people who will sit out in front of my home. I've had my phones tapped and uncloned. I've had recently taken my phone to the Apple store where they showed me these codes and showed me how my phone has been cloned. And I understand there's a device that the police department uses called a Stingray, which also allows you to get into a person's telephone and other things that they have. But I needed to stop. I'm fed up with it. They have absolutely no reason to do this to me. Again, I don't even have any religious affiliations for anyone to target me for this. I've done nothing wrong. The most I can say is that I work with an organization that helps feed and clothe and house the homeless. That's the only thing anyone can ever say I may associate with someone who may have had a criminal past or doesn't have a criminal past. So why this is happening to me, I don't know, but I needed to stop immediately.
Sir, if I may, my name is Mark Smith. I'm the Inspector General for Los Angeles Police Department, and basically part of what that means is that I don't report to the police chief. I report straight to the police commission. One of our tasks is to intake complaints of misconduct, any improper behavior that someone believes the employees of the police department has engaged in. We have a staff member who's here in the back of the room who can meet with you now to maybe get some more details about your case and try to look into that for you.
All right, thank you very much.
And Gary, if you wouldn't mind, just raise your hand and meet with him. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Sherwin, I think you're next. Zach? He's left. Thank you. Mr. John Avalos.
Hi, everybody. I've been attending these meetings for about 3 years since Waukesha Wilson was killed in the jails, and her video still is missing. I'm starting to compare this commission with the sheriff's oversight. I did go to a meeting one day with the sheriff where he had his person there representing him on stage, and he invited people to come. That was at Garfield High School on Wednesday, and then on Thursday there's another meeting with the commission. So that was a lot. I've been to a lot of meetings. But I want you to know that the meeting for the sheriff that he developed himself, that was such a insult. There was no place to park at Garfield High. It was in the evening. That's the only good thing. It was at night. So a lot of working class people were there. But, it's embarrassing that you go there, no parking. We had to drive through the barrio for about 2 hours to park. East LA. And it was just a big farce. The sheriff just did not answer any questions and concerns that we had about the police killings. When we left the high school, there's a big mural in front of East LA High School. And guess what? The Chicano community is represented in the mural with a Spanish flamenco dancer. That was such an insult. It talks about the gentrification going on in our community. But let me move on. Oh my God, 11 seconds. I was able to do live video when I went to see the sheriff's oversight. We can do a live video there. Why can I not do live video here? It gets interrupted. Can that be fixed? I've asked you before. Why cannot that be fixed? It's not my phone because I'm able to do it I was able to do it over there at
Thank you, sir. We can
Can that be
talk with you
fixed?
offline about that. I don't know the technology.
You didn't
but-
know about this? We can't. Most of
Sir,
my
I got
friends
cut
that
off
come,
several times during this meeting myself.
We're not able to do a live. What
Right.
do you do? There's something
Mr.
that
Avalos?
somebody is keeping
Thank
us
you,
from
sir.
being able to do live video.
Thank you.
You're
Ms.
not gonna-
Garcia, you're next, please.
You're not going to work on that?
I said we talked to you offline, sir. Ms. Garcia, and then Mr. Khan.
So yeah, I just have more housekeeping issues. So there was a letter sent to the commission. I didn't get the date, but about a month ago, where we talked about basically the aftermath of the laser program, follow-up that we wanted. We did receive the letter from the Inspector General. He addressed pretty much, I think it was 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 of the issues, supplied some documentation that had pretty much nothing to do with the initial request. I mean, it was some email conversation, nothing substantive. But I want to kind of educate the commission as to why the letter is so important and why we need a response, which has pretty much been a neglect, because in reading the letter, the OIG's only requested to respond to a few of the points. So there's been a neglect now from you, which we're used to, and it's an expectation from you that you will do this. So that's why we come here. So I guess my biggest point is around data collection, because LASER was predominantly about collecting information from the community, FI cards, gang affiliation, arrests, crime reports, putting people on lists, mapping communities, social network analysis, so the repurposing of data. And this is how programs get recreated now that we see precision policing come in. They never spoke about the social network analysis. They never spoke about how they mapped people through the FI cards. So how is all that, what's going on? What's happening with that data? Because now if you terminated the program, that data still exists, and is it being used again? The contract with Palantir. JSS, are you following up with them? You paid them a lot of money for a failed program in which they pretty much lied and said it was working. And funding for this program. Where is all the money now when we urged you to stop funding the program, which ended up revealing that the program was an absolute failure. So there's an expectation from the community that you care and that you're going to follow up. So we're requesting for that follow-up to happen. Giving you 10 business days again. It's been a long time. So the frustration that is here is from your neglect. So please, understand that.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Tiefank, would you kindly work with I think it's the technology subcommittee, to ensure that a response is made?
To Ms. Garcia?
Yes, to the letter that was sent.
Yes, there was a response to Ms. Garcia or Mr. Khan. I can't remember who the response went to from me, and the department was going to respond to those items because I did not possess that data, nor does the commission office. But I will work on getting that.
I'd appreciate an update on that,
Sure,
just to
absolutely.
ensure that appropriate response goes out. Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Mr. Khan.
Yeah, I think the issue is that from our vantage point, these programs never die. They just continue on. They just reconfigure. They take on a new shape. So exactly to Jamie Garcia's point, it's about the repurposing of the data. It's about weaponizing the information that you already have, and now that's what the whole landscape of data-driven policing is, that the same data gets refurbished, regurgitates in several places. But I think the failure is to really understand the purpose of that letter, and that's what I was surprised that when Mark Smith sent the initial response as well, and we're getting ready to have a much more detailed response, because the idea was we had very specific questions. That how has some basic questions like how has the discontinuation of LASER been communicated to the 10,000 patrol officers, to all 21 divisions? Show us a documentation. What has been that communication? How has the discontinuation of this program been communicated to the Bureau of Justice Assistance that funds these programs? What is the status of the contract with JSS and Mark Uchida? What is the status on the monies that were allocated toward this program to Palantir? So these are very specific questions, and we are asking for specific answers because that's exactly what we want to know. So we're going to keep on bringing it up, but I want to go back to last week's issue of drones. And one of the things that the community is asking is, and this is something that Shane Goldsmith was involved as well, that it is really critical that given the overwhelming rejection of drones that people have had, that before you move forward with the 60 to 75 days, them coming back with the policy, you've got to get the community involved. The last time the community forums happened, right here, where Dale Bonner was sitting, Cynthia McLean Hills was sitting, Michael Moore was the assistant chief at the time, and when they announced the community forums, Cynthia McLean Hills said that this is an abomination. Because Tuesday we are here, we find out that all 4 community forums are tomorrow, none of them in South Central, none of them in Boyle Heights, in Van Nuys, in San Pedro, in Westwood, and in Atwater Village. So you've got to go where the community is most impacted, and you've got to have these community forums before any decision is made. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Item 5 on the agenda, closed session. Are there any public comment cards on those?
We have no comment cards, ma'am.
In that case, the commission will move into recess to go into closed session.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss items number 5A1 and 2 in accordance with Government Code 54957. Were unanimously adopted. Is there a motion to adjourn, Madam Vice President?
And it's moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed? 0. 3-0. We stand adjourned. Thank you.
All right.
Conservation agencies like National Geographic, Audubon Society, Cornell University got together and deemed 2018 the Year of the Bird. One of the reasons they did this is because they're seeing sharp declines in native North American birds. Part of this is due to habitat loss. Most of it is due to man-made obstacles. We're making it more and more difficult for these birds to survive. My name is Mike Maxey, Curator of Birds for the Los Angeles